Hey guys, tonight we open at the gates of a medieval castle, somewhere in Europe, on an afternoon so sunny it almost mocks the usual gloom of the Middle Ages. The air is heavy with anticipation, as thick as the heavy velvet robes worn by the courtiers gathered to witness something rather extraordinary. You're standing there too, among the crowd, gently elegoing your way to a better vantage point. Today isn't just another joust or some particularly grisly public punishment. No, today a lion arrives at court, and everyone's pretending to be brave about it. You watch as the king himself strides forward, chin lifted to seem fearless, though historians still argue whether he was secretly terrified of big cats. If he is, he's hiding it under an admirable layer of bravado. His courtiers shuffle nervously behind him, casting suspicious glances at the newly reinforced cage being hauled into the courtyard. And you can't help but smile at their badly concealed unease. But then again, you probably wouldn't survive this either. After all, medieval zoo safety protocols were mostly suggestions scribbled hastily on parchment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know your location and local time down below. I always love to know how far and wide these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You return your attention to the cage. It's large, sturdy, built from iron and heavy oak, probably stronger than anything you've seen constructed at this court before. Clearly, someone with at least a pinch of practicality oversaw the design. The animal inside is pacing, its steps slow, deliberate, almost thoughtful. You see the lion's eyes flicker through the bars, lazily scanning its new kingdom of nervous nobility. Golden fur catches the sunlight, as if the lion itself were stitched from molten gold. Its mane, thick and lush, frames a face of unsettling serenity. Someone in the crowd whispers, "Is it tame?" The keeper, a wiry man with an expression of eternal exhaustion, probably from sleepless nights spent hoping the lion wouldn't figure out how cage locks work, shakes his head and answers simply, "No." You watch the ripple of tension that runs through the crowd, each person shifting slightly backward, yet still craning forward, curiosity battling with caution. It's the perfect medieval paradox, terrified fascination. The king approaches closer, nodding sagely at the beast, his hand stroking a chin so smooth it's obvious his royal razor saw action this morning. He turns back to his advisor, loudly declaring this lion a symbol of his strength, his might, and naturally, his divine right to rule everything from here to the horizon. You notice the lion yawns hugely, displaying teeth longer than your middle finger and twice as sharp. It's either deeply unimpressed by royal proclamations or just digesting breakfast, maybe both. The crowd murmurs appreciatively, and you overhear a couple of monks debating quietly about whether lions have souls. The shorter one insists they do not, his evidence mostly theological and conveniently ignoring the animal's admittedly soulful stare. His companion shrugs non-committally, clearly more concerned about the lion's stomach than its spirituality. As the afternoon unfolds, you drift closer to the cage, close enough to smell the musty aroma of straw and something muskier, primal, like a stable mixed with a hint of distant savanna. It's not an unpleasant scent, but certainly distinct enough that your medieval nose would never mistake it for the comforting aroma of roasted pork or fresh bread baking in the castle ovens. Nearby, a small boy clutching a wooden sword bravely jabs at imaginary foes, claiming that one day he will hunt lions just like this. His mother, rolling her eyes discreetly, pats him gently on the head, possibly relieved that wooden swords rarely provoke lions. Historians still argue whether medieval children were genuinely fearless or just optimistically naive, but either way, this little knight seems unbothered by the king of beasts, currently pacing mere feet from him. The keeper tosses a slab of meat into the cage. The lion doesn't lunge. Instead, it sniffs disdainfully, circling the meal before deciding it's acceptable. A young noblewoman wrinkles her nose elegantly, whispering something to her companion about barbarity. He nods in agreement, discreetly adjusting his heavily jeweled belt. Fashion over practicality, the timeless medieval motto. The king gestures dramatically, announcing plans for more animals, an entire collection, a menagerie fit for a ruler of his importance. You see visions forming in his eyes, exotic beasts from distant lands, the kind most people only read about in poorly illustrated manuscripts. Everyone nods politely, already calculating the sheer impracticality of keeping even one lion fed, let alone a parade of zebras, camels, or mythical griffins, though no one's bold enough to say so aloud. You turn to a nearby court scribe, scratching ink across a parchment at dizzying speed. He's documenting the lion's every movement with the meticulous obsession of a modern-day sports commentator, noting the precise number of paces, yawns, and disdainful glances the creature directs toward the gathered nobles. These notes will surely end up in a bestiary, complete with wild exaggerations, perhaps lions with tails ending in sharp blades, or breath potent enough to paralyze knights at a glance. The lion lies down, stretching luxuriously, looking thoroughly bored with all the fanfare. It begins grooming itself, its powerful tongue making quick work of any offending dust. The king, slightly deflated at this mundane display, hastily announces a feast, deciding that if his lion won't entertain, then roast boar and mulled wine surely will. As the crowd disperses toward the dining hall, your eyes linger on the cage. The lion now sleeps, utterly indifferent to its royal audience. You wonder briefly if it dreams of vast plains it will never again roam, or simply of lunch. Either way, the King's Zoo has officially begun, born from ambition, pride, and perhaps a dash of folly. After all, nothing says medieval royalty quite like owning something dangerous and wildly expensive that you don't fully understand how to care for. And while you might chuckle at the absurdity, you also feel a soft pang of sympathy for the animal destined to spend its life as a living trophy. You wander slowly toward the castle kitchens, your mind drifting back to the lion's sleepy gaze, that profound look of royal boredom. Little does it know, it has become the cornerstone of an entirely new medieval tradition, a zoo created out of curiosity, vanity, and more than a pinch of reckless optimism. But tonight, you won't worry too much about lions or kings or medieval zoo logistics. Instead, you'll let your thoughts melt into the soft, flickering firelight of the castle's great hall, where laughter and lute music blur into a warm background hum. After all, the zoo has just begun, and there will be plenty of time later for pondering how one might safely house a unicorn.
You wake, figuratively, beneath a cold stone archway, where damp moss creeps along the mortar and the sun barely reaches the cobbles unless it's high noon in June. The lion is still asleep in its wooden cage, but the hum of excitement from yesterday's spectacle hasn't vanished. It's simply shifted form. Now, instead of awe, the whispers in the hallways are full of logistics. You hear them over breakfast, over stewed oats and hard bread, because even noble kitchens aren't great at mornings. We'll need someone to feed it daily. And clean the straw. Who even knows what lions eat in the wild? As though there were a forest full of textbook references just outside the moat. The steward is already regretting the entire affair and hasn't even seen the weekly meat budget. This is how it begins. Not with grand plans and triumphant proclamations, though those help, but with quiet inconveniences. Someone has to cart in fresh hay, Someone else has to find a bucket sturdy enough to carry water to a creature that drinks like a blacksmith after a forge fire. And someone, bless them, has to scoop lion droppings before they ferment into something that drives the falcons mad. You shuffle toward the stable yard, where yesterday's cage still rests like an awkward sculpture of ambition. It sits uncomfortably against the backdrop of oxen pens and pig troughs. The lion is now awake, looking thoroughly unimpressed with everything around it. You hear a groom mutter under his breath, "We've got pigs smarter than that thing," which you suspect is a lie, but appreciate the conviction. What no one says out loud is this: the idea of a menagerie, of a whole collection of exotic animals, has caught fire in the royal mind. A lion is not a novelty to be checked off. It is the opening act in a grander performance. The king wants more, and you feel it in the way he paces the courtyard today, already imagining a leopard, maybe an ape or two, something with feathers from the east. Anything that might cause visiting nobles to choke on their wine in admiration or envy.
And that, naturally, means letters must be sent. You're handed one to deliver, a thick scroll sealed with a wax stamp so intricate it probably took someone an hour to etch. It's addressed to a foreign merchant known for having connections. You wonder what exactly those connections entail, and whether they involve gold or the occasional threat of trebuchet. The letter is polite, but firm. The king wants animals. Rare ones, impressive ones. The kind you can't find in the local forest unless you count overly aggressive swans. The merchant is promised handsome payment, a royal audience, and, most worryingly, a degree of creative freedom, which in medieval procurement language means surprise me. You return just in time to see the court painter arrive, summoned to immortalize the lion. He sets up his easel outside the cage, looking far more terrified than inspired. His paints are rich, but limited. Ochres, lamp black, and a green that might have once been blue if it had lived a better life. The lion, sensing attention, licks its paw with performative indifference. As the brushstrokes begin, you notice something odd. The lion in the painting looks different, larger, more majestic, its mane more regal, its eyes more poetic. The painter is not documenting the lion so much as translating it into a symbol. And suddenly you realize this is exactly how the idea of a zoo grows, not from reality, but from representation. Word spreads that the lion is being painted, and by mid-afternoon, a small crowd of bored nobility is standing nearby, offering unsolicited critique. Its ears should be more pointed, one woman says, who has seen exactly 0 lions in her life. Make the eyes sadder, more soulful, another suggests. Shouldn't there be fire in the background? A man pipes up with. The painter obliges, not because he agrees, but because arguing with nobility about imaginary animals is a fast way to find yourself back to illuminating psalms in a dim cloister. And so, the lion slowly begins its transformation from living beast to symbolic artifact. Meanwhile, the king is already drafting plans for new enclosures. You spot a scroll laid out across the long feasting table, the remnants of roasted duck still dotting the margins. The sketches are crude, but the intent is unmistakable. Separate quarters for each future animal, plus a central court for royal viewing. Historians still argue whether these plans were drawn up by an actual architect or the king himself after a particularly strong goblet of mead. The proposed layout includes some rather optimistic touches. A small pond for aquatic creatures, despite the local well drying up every August, and a series of iron fences suitable for dragons or other flying beasts. You stare at that note for a long while, then decide to go outside and breathe the real air before the fantasy becomes too convincing. Out in the courtyard, the lion snoozes again, ignoring its new role as both royal centerpiece and architectural muse. You take a moment to admire the creature, not its symbolism, not its meaning, but the slow rise and fall of its belly, the twitch of a tail that doesn't care whether it's being watched. In that moment, the lion is just a lion, alive, breathing, oblivious to the bureaucracy blooming around it. Behind you, the steward is already arguing with the cook about acquiring daily meat. "We can't feed it scraps forever," he mutters. "That's how you get bad humors, or worse, disrespect." You wonder idly whether the lion is capable of disrespect. It certainly seems to regard everyone with a sort of blanket disdain, like a cat that's been made to attend a garden party, which, in a way, it has. Back in the Great Hall, the courtiers are now discussing what animal should come next. A peacock, perhaps, for elegance. A monkey, for entertainment. Or maybe something truly outlandish, like a giraffe. No one knows what a giraffe actually looks like. One knight insists it has wings. Another claims it sleeps upside down. Someone else says it's just a tall cow, which seems disappointingly plausible. You sip weak ale and watch the room spin with ambition, each suggestion more impractical than the last. The concept of the zoo, though no one has named it yet, is evolving rapidly, shifting from a place of containment to one of storytelling. These animals will not just live here, they will represent faraway lands, imagined worlds, divine power. They will be pieces of a living, breathing fable, curated one confused beast at a time. By nightfall, the painter has finished. The lion in the image is resplendent, surrounded by fire and banners, its eyes full of sorrow and wisdom. The real lion, meanwhile, is asleep with one paw in its water trough. You drift to bed, the cold stone floor beneath your feet, and the scent of hay still faint in your nostrils. Outside, the lion exhales, and the moonlight casts long shadows through the bars of its cage. The king dreams of giraffes. The steward dreams of beef prices. And you, well, you just want to see what they'll bring in next. You wake to the slow creak of a quill scratching against parchment. The scribe, who sits at the edge of the great hall on a splintered bench, is already hard at work. He's hunched, as usual, like someone who's spent too many years bent over prayers, receipts, and, lately, lions. Today, however, his ink is not recording a meat inventory or another noble's indulgent speech. No, he's drafting something different. A list of animals. Not just any animals, though. These are creatures of wonder, beasts drawn not from memory or observation, but from legend, half-heard travel tales, and something dangerously close to imagination. The list includes the lion, of course, then the elephant. No one's seen one, but everyone is sure they're real. A camel, a peacock, a griffin, a basilisk, and then, inexplicably, a small rabbit with human-like ears and the wisdom of a priest. You suspect that last one might be a joke or the result of poor handwriting, but the scribe seems unbothered. You lean in closer. This isn't just a list of desired acquisitions. It's something older, deeper, a longing to understand the world by cataloging it. And what better place to begin than with the animals that fill its wild edges? Historians still argue whether medieval bestiaries were meant as educational texts or as moral instruction disguised in fur and feathers, but there's no question. These manuscripts helped shape how people saw animals, not as creatures, but as symbols. A dog represents loyalty, a fox, deceit, a pelican, self-sacrifice. Lions, predictably, symbolize power, courage, and sometimes Christ himself, depending on how generous your metaphor is feeling that day. The animals are more than themselves. They are ideas wrapped in claws and hooves. The monk beside the scribe hums softly as he arranges a collection of thin vellum pages, each featuring illustrations of creatures both familiar and fantastical. You glance at one, a leopard with 3 heads, each staring in a different direction, as though unsure which way dinner is. Another page depicts an owl wearing a crown. Apparently, wisdom and governance go hand in talon. You walk past the small table where pigments are being mixed. Ground minerals, egg yolk, vinegar, and a good deal of finger crossing.
A young novice is carefully brushing color into the image of a unicorn, its horn oddly limp, like it was drawn by someone with a vague description, but no actual evidence, which, to be fair, is probably the case.
The fascination with cataloging animals, both real and imagined, has bled out of the monasteries now. What once lived between book covers is moving into the physical world. If one can describe a lion in ink, why not house one behind a gate? If a basilisk appears in scripture, surely someone somewhere could produce one with enough coin or persuasion. You step outside, where the winter sun is doing its best impersonation of warmth. The lion is awake again, sniffing at the edges of its straw bed. The crowd is thinned. After all, even royal pets lose their novelty, but a few children peer through the bars, whispering questions to their parents. What does it eat? Can it talk? Does it like songs? The answers, respectively, are meat, no, and probably not. But the parents make up stories anyway, because that's what people do. They turn animals into vessels for wonder. A guard approaches with news. A ship has docked in the nearest port, bringing with it something unusual. Not an animal, yet, but a merchant who claims to know the path to many. He arrives by midday, cloaked in layers that smell faintly of spice and sea salt. His beard is braided with tiny bronze rings, and his eyes are the kind that have stared into deserts and jungles, and maybe into a crocodile's open mouth. The merchant speaks 7 languages, 3 of which you're pretty sure he's invented. He brings scrolls, maps, drawings, contracts, and lays them out before the king, whose appetite for spectacle grows with each inked line. Here is a giraffe, depicted with a neck so long it loops around the scroll twice. Here is a crocodile, looking uncannily like a dragon in a swampy mood. Here is a parrot, its colors exaggerated beyond the limits of nature, unless birds in the tropics actually glow. The king is entranced. The merchant, naturally, speaks in riddles and tall tales. The elephant remembers the face of every man it's ever seen, he says, sipping wine like he owns the castle. The zebra refuses to step into a church. It knows too much of sin. You suspect he is playing to the crowd, but no one dares to laugh. By evening, a deal is struck. The merchant will send word to his sources and begin the procurement of animals. Real animals, he insists. Lions, tigers, apes, maybe even something with scales and too many eyes. In return, he receives coin, status, and importantly, lodging inside the castle, where the food is better and the floors less rat-infested. The bestiary, once the province of cloistered monks, now becomes a guidebook. The scribes begin adapting it for practical use, under royal orders. They add notes: dangerous, needs large cage, do not pet. A sort of proto-zoology is forming. Clumsy, but earnest, as court scholars attempt to understand what they've never seen firsthand. You watch one draw a crocodile based entirely on the word lizard and a second-hand description from a sailor who spent most of the voyage drunk. Still, the effort is earnest. The idea is catching. A living book, written not in ink, but in fur, feather, and fang. A medieval zoo. Not just for entertainment, though certainly that, but for learning, for storytelling, for saying, here is the world, and we, noble, learned, slightly confused medieval humans, are trying to make sense of it. One evening, as the fire crackles and the lion snores, you overhear 2 scholars debating whether dragons count as animals or elemental spirits. One insists that dragons breathe fire and thus belong to the realm of the mystical. The other argues, rather pedantically, that fire is no more magical than digestion, and if a cow can chew cud, surely a dragon can exhale flame. You pretend not to be listening, but make a mental note. Never argue with someone who's written 3 treatises on goats. Outside, a fresh delivery arrives. Not an animal yet, but a crate of cages, iron and wood, some large enough to hold a bear, others barely big enough for a goose.
Each one is lined with straw, and you can see that someone has lovingly carved little symbols on the edges: stars, crosses, and what appears to be a lizard juggling apples. You don't ask. The wiper wipes his brow and announces that more will come. Depends on what beast they bring, he says, but I'm told one of them breathes ice. You're not sure if he means literally, metaphorically, or if he's just very bad at weather descriptions, but you thank him anyway. The sun sets slow and syrupy, dripping gold over the stone walls. You walk past the lion one last time. It watches you without moving, a gaze so heavy you feel its weight in your spine. You nod, and though the lion doesn't nod back, you take the silence as mutual respect. Inside, the scholar's right, the king dreams, the merchant calculates, and somewhere a ship cuts across the sea, holding within it the next chapter of this increasingly odd, ambitious experiment. The medieval zoo is still young, still mostly theoretical, still part myth and part logistics nightmare. But the foundations are there, drawn in ink, built in straw, and dreamt under torchlight. And you, dear listener, are right in the middle of it all, half awake, half dreaming, learning not just about animals, but about the people who needed them to feel less alone in the vast, mysterious world they barely understood.
You begin your morning with the scent of pitch and salt, the kind that clings to ship ropes and foreign crates. Down at the dock, if you can call a rickety wooden platform next to a muddy inlet a dock, there's an air of suspense thick enough to slice. The ship has arrived. The merchant's promise is about to be unboxed. And you, for reasons you no longer bother questioning, have been roped into helping assess the cargo. A small crowd has gathered. Courtiers, cooks, one overly curious monk, and a boy carrying a basket of apples for no reason anyone can determine. The captain of the ship stands barefoot, arms crossed, face sunburnt like a boiled turnip. Be gentle, he warns. They bite, or they sulk. Depends on the mood. The first crate is lowered with a creak and a prayer. The ropes strain like they've seen too much, and when the box finally hits the dock with a solid thud, everyone steps back, except the court jester, who leans in like he's hoping for a punchline. You crack open the crate, breath held. Inside, blinking like it regrets all its choices, is an ape. A real, live, hairy, mildly annoyed ape. It stares at you. You stare back. Then it yawns, scratches its belly, and promptly relieves itself onto the straw. Congratulations! The zoo has grown. The ape is hoisted onto a cart and wheeled toward the castle with all the dignity of a reluctant guest at a wedding. People point. Children shriek. One noblewoman faints, though you suspect she just wanted an excuse to lie down. The ape waves once, though that may have just been a swat at a passing fly, and is carried behind the gates where the lion already reigns in solitary disinterest. Back at the ship, more crates await. A pair of peacocks emerge next, fussy, shimmering, and already offended by the weather. Then a tortoise, which takes its time exiting, as if contemplating whether this whole medieval venture is worth the trouble. And finally, the piece de résistance, a leopard, or rather, a very spotted, very furious cat that may or may not be a leopard. Historians still argue whether early menageries accurately identified the species they kept, or whether anything with dots and claws was simply labeled exotic and fed accordingly. The leopard hisses, everyone claps, and you begin to seriously worry about the structural integrity of the wooden pens back at the castle.
By the time the convoy reaches the courtyard, the king is waiting with the giddy anticipation of a child about to unwrap poorly labeled birthday gifts. He circles each animal slowly, nodding sagely as though he understands their inner thoughts. He pauses longest at the ape, who responds by picking its nose and examining the results with scholarly interest. Majestic, the king murmurs. The animals are placed in hastily constructed enclosures, the sort that suggest ambition outpaced carpentry. The ape gets a wooden platform. The peacocks are given a perch and promptly ignore it. The tortoise is placed in a shallow pit with a lettuce leaf as both decoration and apology. And the leopard, well, it gets extra nails in the door. Visitors pour in almost immediately. Not commoners yet, heavens no, but nobles, clerics, and a few favored scholars. They walk from pen to pen, speaking in hushed tones, as though the animals might judge their Latin pronunciation. You trail behind them, eavesdropping. "That one looks clever," someone says, pointing at the tortoise. "You can tell from the eyes." "I believe the ape is contemplating theology," another adds. "My cousin once saw a peacock in Constantinople, and it bowed to him, as a sign, naturally." The interpretations are as varied as they are ridiculous, but they speak to something deeper. Humans don't just want to see animals, they want animals to reflect themselves, their values, their fears, their imagined glories. It's less a zoo and more a living mirror. Inside the scriptorium, the scribes are in a frenzy. New pages are being added to the bestiary every day now, each one featuring the latest arrivals. The ape is described as a curious creature, prone to mimicry and vulgar gestures. The peacock earns 2 pages of florid prose about vanity and divine beauty. The tortoise is hailed as a symbol of patience, which is a polite way of saying it doesn't do much. And the leopard? Well, it gets extra nails in the door. The painter, bless him, is doing his best, though his depiction of the ape looks suspiciously like his cousin. You suggest that perhaps the leopard's ears are a bit excessive. He glares at you and adds a halo. One afternoon, you find yourself sitting by the tortoise pit, watching it contemplate a pebble. The ape, a few yards away, is swinging from a rope you didn't authorize. The peacocks are loudly asserting their opinion on the state of the world, which is mostly, "Look at me, I am glorious." The leopard naps. You begin to understand something. This zoo, if you can call it that, isn't about control. Not really. It's about curiosity, about peeking through the cracks in the known world and imagining what lies beyond. These animals, dragged from far corners, misunderstood and mismatched, are living symbols of everything people don't quite understand yet, but desperately want to.
Even the king, in his fancier moments, seems humbled by them. He spends hours just sitting and watching. No decrees, no speeches, just quiet observation, as if waiting for the animals to teach him something. They don't, of course, not in words, but in their presence there's a kind of slow magic. At night, the sounds of the menagerie drift across the castle like a lullaby written by a particularly chaotic composer. The low growl of the leopard, the occasional squawk from a peacock, the gentle thump of the ape falling off its perch. Even the tortoise somehow manages to make noise, perhaps just the rustle of leaves as it rearranges its limited world. You lie awake listening, not quite annoyed, not quite amused, just aware. The zoo is alive and growing. Plans are already being made for expansions, a trench for aquatic animals, a platform for birds of prey. Someone has drawn up a map showing a future hall of snakes, which you strongly suspect will be less popular with visitors. The royal carpenter is taking commissions for more cages, and a group of scholars is arguing over whether centaurs, if real, would need stables or libraries. The line between real and imagined has blurred so thoroughly that no one bothers to separate them anymore. If you can draw it, talk about it, dream of it, perhaps it belongs here. A final crate arrives late one night, bearing no label, just the merchant seal. Inside is something unexpected. A small, twitchy creature with fur like smoke and eyes too large for its head. No one knows what it is. The scholar guesses lemur, though he admits he may have just invented the word.
The king names it Nibbles. It bites the steward. Everyone applauds. And just like that, the medieval zoo expands again. Not just in number, but in spirit. Not a prison, not quite a spectacle. Something else. A strange, breathing cabinet of curiosity. A place where fantasy and fact hold hands and take turns telling bedtime stories. And you, lucky soul, are here to witness it all.
You begin the morning with a walk through the dew-slick grass of the outer courtyard, the chill still clinging to your sleeves like a needy ghost. The sky above is barely lit, a pale smudge of sun behind drifting clouds, and you can already hear the low groan of the ape stretching somewhere behind its enclosure. You pass the tortoise pit, where the tortoise appears to have moved precisely one half-shell length overnight, presumably in pursuit of a dream. The peacocks are not yet screaming, which feels like a small mercy, and the leopard is awake, pacing its pen in quiet, calculated arcs. Today is not a day for new arrivals. No ships are due, no crates expected. Today is a day of questions, of scholarly squabbles and quiet recalibration. Because now that the animals are here, the next question has emerged: what precisely are we supposed to do with them? You find yourself seated in a small stone room, shoulder to shoulder with 5 other individuals who have never agreed on anything and probably never will. There's the royal physician, who insists that proximity to exotic animals can help with everything from melancholy to gout. There's the bishop's man, who seems very concerned about whether or not the ape has a soul. There's the steward, muttering about budgets and hay. The court philosopher has brought 3 scrolls and a headache. And finally, the king's niece, who seems to be here only because she enjoys poking the leopard enclosure with a long stick. They argue, of course. That's what learned people do. They argue over whether the animals are divine reflections of moral virtue or merely curious gifts from God's wild portfolio. Whether the leopard counts as a beast of the field or something else entirely. Whether it's appropriate to teach children moral lessons using a peacock that cannot stop hissing at its own reflection. Maybe we should train them, someone offers. Make them do tricks. The court philosopher flinches like he's been slapped with a herring. We are not jesters, he says. We are students of the natural world. I'm both, the jester chimes in from the doorway, holding a half-eaten apple and an expression of unearned confidence. You're assigned a task: catalog the animals. Not just what they are, but what they do. Habits, temperaments, interactions. Think of it as field work, except your field smells like lion breath and damp straw. You begin with the ape, who quickly becomes both the star and the headache of the entire menagerie. It has discovered how to untie knots. It has also discovered the steward's shoe, which it promptly steals and refuses to return. You note in your parchment journal, ape exhibits unusual cleverness and deep disdain for footwear. Historians still argue whether the behaviors observed in early zoo animals reflected natural instincts or the stress of captivity. You, observing the ape fashion a sort of cape out of hay and parade around with it, begin to suspect it may simply be bored.
The tortoise proves more difficult to assess, mostly because it spends large portions of the day doing nothing. Is it thinking? Is it plotting? Is it asleep? You crouch by its pit for an hour, sketching the shape of its shell, and are rewarded with a single, deliberate blink. You write, "Tortoise may be meditating," or constipated. The peacocks, meanwhile, refuse to be ignored. They strut constantly, scream at their own shadows, and have taken a profound dislike to the bishop's man, who claims this is proof of demonic interference. One peacock chases a scroll across the courtyard, tramples it, and then sits proudly atop the shredded parchment as if proclaiming a new religious order. Back in the scribes' quarters, the bestiary pages are multiplying. The artists are working from life now, or as close to it as their imaginations allow. The ape is redrawn, this time with slightly less resemblance to the scribe's cousin. The tortoise is now depicted wearing a tiny crown, perhaps as compensation for its low speed. The peacocks are rendered in full flourish, every feather painstakingly inked in blue and gold. And the leopard, the leopard, has somehow acquired wings in its newest illustration. You raise an eyebrow, and the artist shrugs. It felt majestic, he says. There's no consensus yet on what the zoo actually is. Some call it a school. Others call it a miracle. A few just mutter, expensive, under their breath whenever they pass the feed storage. But its presence is reshaping the castle in subtle ways. People speak differently now. They reference animal behavior in their metaphors. As proud as a peacock and as grumpy as the leopard at noon become common phrases. Children imitate the ape's swinging dance. The cook starts seasoning meat with spices fit for a lion. And the guards? They've taken to betting on how far the tortoise will travel in a day. So far, the record is 17 inches. One afternoon, a group of monks visits from a nearby monastery. They bring scrolls and ink and very serious expressions. They are here, they say, to study the moral symbolism of the animals. They quote Augustine, then pause awkwardly when the ape flings a turnip at one of them. The turnip misses, barely. In the evening, you join a quiet gathering in the Great Hall, where the king invites everyone to share their theories. A scholar proposes that the leopard represents the chaos of the fallen world. Another argues that the ape is a distorted mirror of human pride. The bishop's man insists that none of this matters because the peacock is clearly possessed. You, when asked, simply say, they are what they are, fascinating, unpredictable, and oddly comforting. The king nods and pours you more wine. That night, you pass the pens one more time. The ape is curled into itself, breathing slow, its hay cape discarded in the corner. The peacocks are finally quiet, heads tucked beneath wings, as if even vanity needs rest. The tortoise is half submerged in its shallow pool, dreaming, you hope, of wide-open meadows. And the leopard, still awake, still pacing, a blur of fur and tension against the moonlit bars. You stand there a long while, listening to the shuffle and rustle of the medieval zoo settling into its rhythm. The scholars will keep debating, the scribes will keep illustrating, the monks will keep quoting saints between flinches. But the animals? They will just keep being animals. And maybe that's the lesson.
You wake to the sound of scratching, deliberate, rhythmic, and entirely too close. The sort of sound that says something with claws is trying to escape. You throw on your tunic and rush to the courtyard, still bleary-eyed, heart beating a few paces faster than dignity allows. It's the leopard, of course, because who else would it be? The wooden bars of its enclosure are groaning in protest. The creature prowls with intensity, eyes glowing faint in the morning gloom, its body taut like a coiled spring of fur and malice. A single nail, one of the thick iron ones, has been worked loose overnight. You don't scream, that would only make things worse. Instead, you call for the keeper. Now, let's talk about him, the first official keeper of the royal beasts. His name is Wulfstan, though everyone simply calls him Wolf, not because he's particularly wild, but because he smells like one. A permanent bouquet of hay, fur, and something slightly rancid that defies classification. Wolf is a man of few words, many bruises, and an intimate understanding of animal digestive systems. He lumbers into the courtyard still chewing on a crust of bread, holding a wooden bucket that may or may not contain breakfast for a carnivore. With no urgency whatsoever, he examines the nail, pats the leopard's nose through the bars, an act both astonishing and medically inadvisable, and mutters, "He's just bored. Needs a carcass or a game." You begin to understand the scope of this new position. The zoo, if we can really use that word yet, is no longer just an idea. It's a system, a living ecosystem of care, containment, feeding schedules, emotional coaxing, and in Wolf's case, a generous application of swearing at uncooperative monkeys. Feeding, it turns out, is a full-time production. The ape requires fresh fruit and cooked grains, but also has developed a taste for the buttery pastries meant for the nobles. The tortoise, despite all appearances of calm, can demolish a cabbage with surprising efficiency. The peacocks demand grains and sulk if the proportions are off. And the leopard, raw meat, of course, preferably goat or deer, delivered with the flair of a court performance. Apparently, if you don't toss the meat just right, it refuses to eat it. Dignity matters, even in blood-soaked cuisine. The feeding rituals have become their own kind of theater. Nobles line up to watch the daily meals, pointing and gasping as though they were at a joust. Some treat it as a divine spectacle, an illustration of the natural order. Others just enjoy watching the ape toss melon rinds at the bishop's man. Again. Wolf has names for all the animals, though no one but you uses them. The ape is Sir Grumbles. The leopard is Mistress Spots. The tortoise is simply Old Boy. And the peacocks? Feathered Lords of Ego. You ask him how he keeps track of it all. He shrugs and says, "Same way you keep track of nobles. Feed them, don't turn your back on them, and never corner them when they're angry."
Wolf lets you follow him for a day. A long, smelly, occasionally dangerous day. You help clean the pens, refill the water troughs, and nearly lose a finger to the ape, who mistakes it for a fig. You also witness the tortoise sneeze, which is far more dramatic than you anticipated. There is also the daily inspection of the perimeter, checking for damage, signs of digging, loosened planks. Especially after the night the leopard nearly made a break for it. The kin visits during the afternoon, not with ceremony, but quietly. He walks the rows, hands behind his back, face unreadable. He pauses longest by the leopard, watching it prowl in silence. You wonder what he sees in it. A mirror, a metaphor, a reminder that even power needs a cage sometimes. Later you find him speaking with Wolf by the feed room, asking about expenses. Goat meat is costly. Straw needs constant replacing. Apples rot fast in warm weather. The tortoise, despite its size, eats more than expected. You expect the king to grumble. Instead, he nods, says, "It's worth it," and walks away, robes trailing behind him like the tail of an aging comet. That night, you write in your journal, the animals are no longer guests, they are residents, and the castle has shifted around them. There's talk now of assigning apprentices to help Wolf, young lads with good instincts and bad noses. One of them, a boy named Theo, manages to fall into the ape pen on his first day. No harm done, unless you count the banana peel in his hair and the bruised pride. The ape seems delighted. Wolf takes it in stride. He teaches the boys how to scoop without gagging, how to approach a pacing cat, and most importantly, how to listen. He says animals speak, just not the way you do. You hear with your eyes, with your spine, with your nose if you're brave. By the week's end, the leopard's enclosure has been reinforced. The ape has been given more toys, mostly sticks and ropes, but he uses them like tools. The peacocks have figured out how to stand in the way of everyone at all times. And the tortoise has acquired a fan club of 3 girls who come every morning to feed it flower petals and sing it songs. You begin to feel that this medieval zoo isn't just a curiosity or a symbol. It's a learning place, a school without textbooks, a chapel without sermons. It teaches patience, humility, the art of watching, and, occasionally, how to dodge projectile fruit. Late one evening, as the sun bleeds out behind the hills, you find yourself in the courtyard again. Wolf leans against a post, arms folded, watching the ape climb and the leopard doze. He doesn't say much, as usual, just nods and says, "They're not like us, but they're not that far either." You nod, not because you fully understand, but because it feels like the right thing to do. Behind you, the castle flickers with torchlight. Beyond the walls, the world remains loud and muddy and terribly human. But here, in this odd corner of straw and tooth and feather, something quieter breathes. And tomorrow, it will need feeding again.
You wake this time not to claws or hooves or frustrated peacocks,
but to horns. Not the musical kind, mind you. The kind that are attached to a creature far larger than necessary and arriving on a cart too small for dignity. A new animal has arrived. And as always, with it comes a fresh round of confusion, speculation, and a vaguely chaotic attempt to look prepared. The guards unload it at the outer gate, struggling with ropes, shouting things like, "Steady now!" and "Don't let it see the ape!" You're summoned before you've even finished your first sip of spiced morning broth, pulled by the elbow into the commotion before you've remembered to fasten your belt. Standing before you is a massive beast. An aurochs, someone whispers. Or maybe a zebu. Or maybe, as one of the younger squires insists, a cow with ambitions. No one agrees. It has long, curved horns that could impale a knight's pride, if not the knight himself, and deep, thoughtful eyes that seem to suggest it regrets being part of this episode entirely. The king is already present, which means things are official. He watches from the steps with an expression of amusement, or possibly sleep deprivation. You can never tell with royalty. He gestures to the steward, who nods gravely and immediately begins discussing pen construction, feed portions, and, perhaps optimistically, breeding potential. This is not just a delivery, it's a statement. A new animal means new status, a symbol of reach and influence. Someone far away has sent this beast as a gift, or maybe as a trade, or as a peace offering disguised in fur and snorting breath. In medieval diplomacy, animals are currency with legs. Historians still argue whether such exotic creatures were traded more for power, for novelty, or for absurd bets made over too much wine. This particular arrival seems to fall into all three categories. You move through the courtyard with the animal lumbering behind you, trailing hay and vague disapproval. The leopard watches from its enclosure with narrowed eyes, clearly unimpressed by the newcomer. The ape screeches once, then loses interest. Only the tortoise seems entirely unfazed, continuing its morning nap in full shell outstretched glory. The pen is ready by afternoon. A large structure with reinforced beams, a shallow water trough, and a gate designed with the clear understanding that this animal could flatten it if mildly irritated. Wolf supervises the move with his usual stoic calm, although you notice he keeps a healthy distance. Once inside the pen, the animal snorts, sniffs the hay, and lowers itself into a sitting position that feels somehow judgmental. Of course, everyone must weigh in. The bishop's man declares it an emblem of perseverance, citing some obscure passage where large animals symbolize spiritual endurance. The steward simply mutters about feed costs. The jester suggests it might be half demon based on the shape of its horns and the fact that it hasn't blinked in 5 minutes. The children, as usual, are less subtle. They immediately name it Sir Mooington and begin daring each other to touch its nose. You, ever the diligent observer, begin your notes. Species uncertain, possibly bovine, emits contemplative sounds, does not appear to approve of our collective choices. Over the next few days, the animal becomes a source of fascination. Courtiers make detours past its pen, whispering speculative tales of its origin. They say it came from the edge of the world, someone claims, although the steward insists it was only from a trading port 3 days away.
The king is pleased. He visits the pen every evening, tossing it an apple and watching it chew with slow, deliberate dignity. The leopard remains unimpressed. The ape, however, begins mimicking the animal's low grunts, which is deeply confusing for everyone. Diplomatic gifts like these were a medieval trend. Monarchs sent lions, giraffes, bears, and, famously, an elephant or two across staggering distances, often without a plan for what would happen when they arrived. Imagine the logistical acrobatics of feeding a rhino in 13th century Paris, You barely have enough bread for the people, and suddenly you've got a creature that eats barrels of greenery like it's salad at a feast. The practical problems are numerous. Feed must be sourced, fences reinforced, servants trained. A surprising number of squires are bitten, scratched, or knocked into mud. One of them earns the dubious honor of being the first to be headbutted into a goose trough. The goose, it must be said, was less than sympathetic. But there's more than spectacle in these animals. There's messaging. A giraffe is not just a long-necked oddity. It's a walking symbol of connection with distant lands. A bear in a courtyard says, "We are strong enough to house danger." A horned beast suggests endurance, patience, and a touch of menace should that ever be required. The queen's cousin arrives from a nearby duchy and is given a tour. She's polite about the peacocks, cautiously impressed by the ape, and visibly unnerved by the leopard. But when she sees the new creature, still unnamed by official decree, she gasps. "You have a holy cow," she exclaims. The bishop's man immediately begins sweating. Turns out, in her homeland, such animals are considered sacred, not to be kept in pens, not to be watched like curiosities. You hastily explain that this one is, in fact, a royal envoy of sorts, treated with the utmost respect and absolutely never used for, say, tug-of-war contests with apprentices. You quietly cancel the scheduled tug-of-war contest. As the weeks pass, the animal settles. It responds to Wolf, who names it Mabel, claiming it's better to name something after a beloved aunt than to go around calling it the big snorty one. Mabel seems to tolerate the name. She even allows children to approach, occasionally lowering her massive head for a scratch behind the ear. You're not sure how she learned that gesture, but it happens every time someone says, "Good girl." At night, the creature lies still beneath the stars. Her breath rises in slow clouds, blending with the mist, like she belongs more to the earth than the court. You sit nearby sometimes, scribbling notes, listening to her steady breathing and wondering how such an enormous presence can bring such a strange calm. There's talk of building a second pen for future arrivals. Rumors swirl that a sultan might send a crocodile. The steward is already researching reptile-proof fencing, which appears to be just more fencing. You walk the grounds at dusk, watching the torches flicker against stone and straw. The peacocks are perched high, silhouetted like feathered gargoyles. The ape sleeps tangled in a red of ropes. The leopard, ever the insomniac, paces silently, yellow eyes alert. And in the largest pen, Mabel sleeps, her massive bulk rising and falling with serene rhythm. No one argues about her anymore. No one questions her presence. She simply is, and somehow, that's enough. Sometimes, the most majestic creatures are not the ones that roar or hiss or strike fear. Sometimes, they're the ones that stand still, eat slowly, and make you wonder why you ever thought silence was boring.
By now, you've developed a peculiar routine. Mornings begin with the scent of hay, damp stone, and a strange combination of wet fur and overripe fruit. You pass the tortoise, still unmoved, still suspiciously in the same spot, nod to the leopard, who nods back, possibly, and toss a pear into the ape's enclosure. If he's in a good mood, he throws it back. If he's not, he eats it and throws the core at your head. But today is different. Today, you hear bells. Not the grand pealing of cathedral towers or the sharp functional clang of a dinner call. These are delicate, ornamental bells, the kind you might imagine decorating the sleeves of an overly enthusiastic monk, or a peacock with a flair for pageantry. You follow the sound to the courtyard, where a small procession is unfolding, seemingly unannounced and fully committed to its own theatrical importance. At its center,
a group of robed clergy bearing embroidered banners, and a pair of birds. Peacocks, yes, but these aren't your everyday strutting fowl. These are draped in fine silk sashes, adorned with gold-painted combs, and trailing little clinking bells on their tail feathers. You blink once, twice. Still happening. A priest steps forward and makes a sweeping declaration. These are the sacred birds of Saint Ephrosinus, bringers of divine elegance and celestial vigilance. You're about to ask what celestial vigilance looks like in bird form, but think better of it. The peacocks are installed ceremoniously in their new enclosure, not far from the others. Their previous inhabitants, two particularly mean-tempered geese, have been relocated, much to the relief of the stable hands. A small crowd gathers as the clergy chant blessings. The peacocks pose dramatically, necks arched, tail feathers flaring like delicate fans. One of them actually winks, or maybe that's just your imagination playing tricks again. The church's involvement is new, but not entirely unexpected. Medieval ecclesiastical figures had a long tradition of blending the symbolic with the zoological. Lions represented power and virtue. Doves meant peace. Serpents, well, we all know how that went. Historians still argue whether such animals were genuinely revered or just convenient metaphors. Either way, here they are, squawking at the bishop's man and leaving droppings with divine timing. Over the next few days, the peacocks become the darlings of the courtyard. Nobles stop by to admire their plumage and murmur phrases like ethereal grace and avian miracles. The apes seem confused. The tortoise remains unconcerned. The leopard, to her credit, merely watches them without lunging, which is considered growth. Wolf is predictably unimpressed. "I liked the geese better," he grumbles. "At least they were honest about wanting to bite you." Still, he makes sure the peacocks receive the best grain. He even builds a little shaded archway for them, complete with a perch draped in faded velvet. They like to be higher than everyone else, like dukes with feathers. You begin to notice how their presence changes the rhythm of things. Courtiers visit more often. Music plays softly in the background. Harpists, seated near the aviary, plucking chords that sound vaguely like lullabies for preening birds. Children come bearing flower garlands, which the peacocks ignore unless they're made with grapes. One of them has figured out how to nudge open the enclosure door, saunter into the middle of the courtyard, and demand raisins by flapping his wings like a sanctified windmill. The church uses the birds as teaching tools. Parables are rewritten to include feathers. A sermon is given titled, "Even the Peacocks Sing for the Lord," although everyone agrees that the shrieking is more infernal than angelic.
The Queen's ladies begin painting tiny portraits of the birds onto fans and combs. One insists her dreams have improved since gazing into the sapphire eyes of Brother Plume. That's what they've named him. The other is Lady Glittertail. You make a note never to name animals again. Meanwhile, another curious development unfolds. Messages. Small notes begin appearing near the aviary, folded bits of parchment slipped between stones or tucked into grain sacks. Prayers, mostly. Wishes. Hopes. Things like, "Let my child be born strong," or "Grant me courage before the king's judgment." Someone even writes, "May I pass wind without shame during banquet season." No one admits to placing them, but the number grows. Eventually, Wolf places a little wooden box by the pen. "For feathers are nonsense," he says. It fills up within a week. You realize slowly that these animals have become more than attractions. They are symbols now, vessels for human longing, imagination, and mischief. Their presence transforms the atmosphere, not just physically, but spiritually. And it's not just the peacocks. Whispers begin circulating about the tortoise. Someone claims it blinked 3 times in answer to a question. Another says it nodded toward the chapel bell. You suspect boredom and wishful thinking, but the stories stick. A young boy places a coin on the tortoise's back and asks it to cure his sister's cough. A nun leaves a painted stone. Someone ties a ribbon to its shell and insists it was glowing by morning. You've reached a peculiar turning point. The zoo, still not officially called that, is no longer just a collection. It's a court of miracles, a shrine of whiskers and claws, a place where meaning is assigned not just by scholars or rulers, but by the people who pass through, by what they need to believe. One afternoon, as you're cleaning up a pile of feathers and half-chewed figs, the bishop approaches. He is solemn, as always, with a brow furrowed like poorly kept parchment. He studies the peacocks for a long moment, then says, "You know, in the old texts, they symbolized immortality." You nod. He continues, "But I suspect these ones mostly symbolize hunger and vanity." Another nod. Then, almost conspiratorially, he adds, "Still, they make the people happy, even if they shriek like devils being plucked." Later that night, after the bells have stopped ringing and the courtyard lies quiet under moonlight, you sit by the aviary. The birds rest, their feathers tucked, their heads still. Wolf leans beside you, chewing on something indeterminate and probably regrettable. He doesn't speak for a long time. Then, softly, "People need stories. If they don't get them from books, they'll make them up to something shiny to look at while they do it." You look at the peacocks. You think of the boy's coin, the painted stone, the ribbons and prayers and songs whispered at feathered feet. You understand. The medieval zoo, still not named, still evolving, has become a place of quiet belief. Not the kind shouted from pulpits or carved into church doors, but the soft kind. The ordinary magic that happens when people look at an animal and see not just fur or feathers, but the possibility of something more.
You wake before sunrise to a shriek that's definitely not human, and just as definitely not a peacock. It's louder, rougher, sharper around the edges. You fumble for your boots, knock over a bucket of carrots, and jog half limping toward the enclosures, heart already preparing for the possibility of escaped leopards or apes declaring rebellion. But no, it's none of those. This morning's musical alarm belongs to a falcon, sleek, silver, furious, and currently sinking its talons into the glove of a man you've never seen before. He stands in the middle of the training yard like he owns it, tall, wrapped in layers of leather and linen, his hood thrown back to reveal a face lined by sun and wind. A falconer, a proper one. Not like the squires who sometimes play with owls and get pecked for their trouble. This one moves like the bird is an extension of his own breath. The king has summoned him, of course, that much is clear, from the entourage standing nearby, wide-eyed and scribbling notes on parchment as though the bird might recite poetry at any moment. Falconry, as it turns out, is not just a hobby. In this court, it's practically a sport of kings, a symbol of status wrapped in feathers and sharpness. You already know falcons were prized in medieval Europe, but you didn't realize how much of a performance it was, like dressage, but angrier and airborne. The falconer releases the bird, and it rockets into the sky with a whistling sound that leaves everyone squinting upward. A rabbit is released in the lower field, the falcon dives, the rabbit dodges. The bird adjusts mid-air with a grace that's both beautiful and slightly terrifying. It doesn't catch the rabbit, not this time, but it makes a point. It could have. The crowd applauds. The falconer bows slightly, not to them, but to the bird, which returns to his glove with a flutter and a bored expression. Over the next few weeks, falconry becomes the new obsession. Nobles who barely tolerated the ape now want birds on their wrists. Ladies commission leather gauntlets lined with velvet. One noble insists on dyeing his bird's feathers with crushed berries to make it look more noble. The bird bites him, twice.
You watch from a distance, bemused. The falconer trains quietly, letting the birds speak for him. He teaches a few apprentices, the brave ones, how to approach, how to whistle, how to reward. One gets too close and ends up with a sliced lip. The falconer shrugs. Lesson learned. You try your hand at it. Just once. The bird regards you with the same disdain usually reserved for tax collectors. You hold out your arm, it perches for a moment, long enough for you to feel the weight, the heat, the coiled readiness, and then takes off, almost yanking your shoulder out of alignment. You're told this is a compliment. Falcons, hawks, and even owls become fixtures of the menagerie. Not in cages, but on perches, in shaded nooks, on leather-wrapped roosts along the outer wall. They blink slowly, like they know things. You suspect they do. Feeding them is an exercise in precision. Small bits of raw meat offered with tongs where you risk a finger. Wolf supervises, though he admits he prefers animals with less wing and more patience. At least the leopard pretends to like you, he says. The apes are not fans. One attempts to mimic a falcon's cry, resulting in a sound that causes 3 horses to bolt and a guard to drop his spear on his own foot. The tortoise, predictably, remains indifferent.
But the atmosphere changes. There's a kind of elegance now. Nobles wander the grounds with birds perched on arms like gaudy jewelry. Messages are sent via trained pigeons. The bishop's man suggests that the birds represent the Holy Spirit, but then quickly retracts the statement when one relieves itself on his cloak. Falconry wasn't just sport, it was prestige. Historians still argue whether the birds were more status symbols or genuine hunting companions. Likely both. Some kings reportedly paid fortunes for rare breeds. Falcons from Norway, hawks from Egypt, owls with feathers that shimmered like oil. One evening, a feast is held in the Great Hall. Between courses, a falcon demonstration unfolds in the rafters. The bird loops between torches and chandeliers, never brushing a flame, never missing a cue. It's mesmerizing. Then, just as dessert arrives, the falcon decides it's had enough and snatches a honeyed fig right off the queen's plate. Gasps, silence, then laughter. Even from the queen, who lifts her goblet and declares, "Let us toast to freedom with feathers." You jot that down for posterity. There are mishaps, of course. One bird escapes for 3 days and is found sitting on the chapel roof, glaring at pilgrims. Another lands on a merchant's hat in the village, causing the man to scream and drop an entire wheel of cheese. That one's still talked about in the tavern. But these birds, soaring, shrieking, impossible to ignore, bring a strange serenity to the zoo, a kind of moving poetry. The falconer says little, but one day, while cleaning a perch, he says to you, "Birds fly because they must, but they stay because they choose." You're not sure if he's talking about falcons or something else. Either way, it feels true. One afternoon, you catch Wolf staring at a hawk with an expression you can't quite read. When you ask, he says, "I had a bird once, not for sport, just a crow, named it Hamlet." You wait. "It stole my bread every morning, but it came back, every time." You wonder if that's the closest Wolf gets to saying he misses someone. As autumn creeps in, the birds fluff their feathers more often, the air is crisp, the sky a sharper shade of blue. Leaves fall across the training yard, and the falcons slice through them like dancers. At night, you sit on the wall and watch their silhouettes against the moon. They roost on high ledges, heads tucked, talons curled around old stone. There's something ancient in their shape, something that makes you feel small, but in the best way, like a spectator in a story that started long before you and will keep going, wings beating in rhythms older than kings. The zoo, or whatever it is now, keeps expanding, but these birds aren't caged. They're visitors, performers, ghosts with feathers. And when they fly, the whole world hushes.
You think of the leopard's yawn, the tortoise's blink, the ape's tantrums, the peacock's vanity, and then the falcon's silent glide through the dusk. Different creatures, different kinds of power, but all somehow part of this strange, breathing place, this living pageant of fur and wing and fantasy, and you, lucky enough to see it unfold.
It begins, as all fashion disasters do, with a duke and a silk obsession. You're tending to the water trough when he arrives, late, overdressed, and absolutely delighted with himself. His doublet is brocade, his boots impractical, and he carries a leash. At the end of the leash, trotting uncertainly across the gravel, is a creature that does not belong on a leash. A lynx. Its ears twitch irritably, and its eyes scream revenge in a language older than Latin. The Duke beams. "Isn't she lovely?" he says, gesturing grandly. "I've named her Duchess." Because of course he has. You're too polite to say what you're thinking, which is, that animal is 5 seconds from leaping onto your throat and using your powdered wig as nesting material. Instead, you smile and nod and make a mental note to reinforce the herb garden's perimeter. The lynx, against all expectations, settles. Sort of. It paces like a bored royal and growls at anyone who makes eye contact longer than 2 seconds. The Duke commissions a harness for her made of, what else? Blue velvet, with gold tassels, and a tiny silver bell that she promptly chews off. Within a week, half the court is parading their own exotic pets around the garden paths. A minor noble trots past with a red fox wearing a ruffled collar. One lady leads a monkey dressed in a child's bonnet. Someone attempts to dye a goat blue and claims it's a northern unicorn. The goat eats his hat in protest. This new trend, as absurd as it seems, actually mirrors something that was very real in the late medieval period: the fashion of decorative animal accessories and ostentatious handling. Especially in noble courts where appearance mattered more than practicality, animals were often dressed and paraded as extensions of wealth and status. Historians still argue whether the animals enjoyed this or merely tolerated it for the occasional fig. Suddenly, Wolfe finds himself tasked with designing accessories. Leatherwork, silver clasps, embroidered leads. "I raise panthers, not purse dogs," he mutters, but secretly he's quite good at it. He fashions a collar for the peacock, Lady Glittertail, remember her? That sparkles just enough in torchlight to draw attention, but not enough to be tasteless. It's a hit. The bishop's man, to everyone's surprise, blesses the collars. He says, "So they may walk with dignity." You're beginning to think he just enjoys the sound of his own prayers echoing through the aviary. Even the tortoise isn't spared. Someone knits it a little cap. It slides off, slowly, with all the drama of a stage curtain. The tortoise, unimpressed as ever, blinks once and continues its glacial journey towards the sunniest stone.
But the true pièce de résistance appears one afternoon in the form of a falcon. Not just any falcon, the falcon. The one that bit the Berry-Dye noble. It returns, this time wearing a crimson hood embroidered with the family crest. It perches proudly on the falconer's arm, swiveling its head with military precision, hood hiding its sharpest glares. The hood is fastened with a gold clasp shaped like a tiny fleur-de-lis. "Bit dramatic," Wolfe says. "I love it," you whisper. As the craze spreads, artisans from the town are summoned to contribute. One creates a line of animal shoes. Yes, shoes. For goats. For monkeys. For an extremely displeased badger that promptly kicks them off and buries them in the mud. Another introduces a line of perfumes for the discerning beast. It's mostly rose water mixed with pine resin and regret. A dog sneezes for an hour. A monkey steals a vial and drinks it, then refuses to climb anything for 2 days. You're not sure whether this counts as progress or madness, possibly both. Still, it changes the dynamic. People begin to visit, not just for the animals themselves, but for their fashion. Have you seen the lynx's new sash? I hear the parrots wearing lapis beads. It becomes a game of who can accessorize best without getting mauled. And somewhere in the chaos, you notice something unexpected, a sense of care. Not just performance, but genuine attention. Animals are brushed more often, fed more regularly, given softer bedding, cooler water, shelter from harsh wind. Their handlers, for all their ridiculous cloaks and scented gloves, begin to observe and adapt. They learn what the lynx likes, dark corners and liver, and what the ape hates, bells, definitely bells. The falcon gets rest days, the goat gets space. The tortoise, well, the tortoise gets left alone, blessedly. In an odd way, fashion brings familiarity. The zoo, unofficial as ever, becomes not just a curiosity cabinet, but a collection of relationships. People start asking, how's Duchess's paw? Did the hawk eat yesterday? Has the fox stopped chewing curtain tassels? One day, the queen herself visits, cloaked in white, with no entourage save a boy holding a parasol and a maid carrying seed cakes. She kneels beside the lynx, arm outstretched. Everyone holds their breath. The lynx, regal as ever, pads forward and, astonishingly, nuzzles her hand.
The queen smiles. She needs no jewels, she says. She is her own ornament. You see Wolf scribbling that down, likely for later mockery. Later that evening, over a dinner of cold pheasant and questionable wine, you find yourself thinking about the odd collision of beauty and beast. The medieval world had a strange relationship with animals. On one hand, they were laborers, horses and oxen, mules and hounds. On the other, they were symbols of sin, of virtue, of nations. Lions for courage, snakes for deceit, doves for peace. But somewhere in between, they were also loved, in their own way, clumsily, lavishly, occasionally dressed in velvet. Historians often overlook this in favor of war and kings and treaties, but in the silk-leased lynx and the hooded falcon, in the goats wearing ribbons and the apes chewing scented cuffs, there's a quieter truth, that sometimes people just wanted to be near something wild, something beautiful, something that looked back without judgment, even if it occasionally threw a fig at your head. You walk through the enclosure paths at dusk, torchlight flickering, fabric rustling. The lynx sleeps in a nest of furs. The monkey snores in a basket. The falcon perches on its high rail, feathers fluffed, head tucked. Even the tortoise, slowly blinking in the last rays of sunlight, seems content. You pass a girl whispering to the peacock, tying a flower to its leg. A boy sketching the fox's tail. A knight standing still while a tiny owl balances on his shoulder like a crown. It's absurd. It's extravagant. It's lovely. And as you sit beneath the torch outside the aviary, watching the birds settle into silence and the stars inch across the sky, you realize the zoo has become more than a display. It's become a mirror, reflecting not just the animals, but the people who gather around them, their hopes, their vanities, their gentleness, their need to adorn, to care, to marvel at something alive and untamed. It's fashion, it's theater, it's affection in disguise. And yes, sometimes it's just a goat in a velvet cape. But you smile anyway. Because somewhere in all of it, in the chaos of collars and the drama of hoods, there's a quiet truth. Sometimes we dress the wild not to tame it, but to remind ourselves how extraordinary it really is.
You never thought you'd see a camel in a snowstorm. Technically, it's not quite a snowstorm, more like a confused flurry that can't decide whether it's sleet, dust, or divine punishment for your sins. But either way, there it is, a camel. right in front of the barn, looking as offended as any creature with 2 humps and 0 insulation can manage. You stare at it. It stares back. Then it makes a sound that resembles a gargling trumpet, and you decide today is going to be a weird one. The camel has arrived courtesy of a gift exchange between kingdoms, something about sealing trade agreements with exotic tokens of goodwill. The king received silk, spices, and this very chilly beast, who has already consumed half the herb garden and tried to bite the bishop's assistant. You're told its name is Caspar, or possibly Gaspar, or maybe don't touch that. No one agrees, least of all the camel. Accommodating Caspar becomes an urgent project. The stables aren't tall enough, the walls aren't wide enough. The other animals, especially the goat, are deeply confused and mildly insulted. Even the leopard seems uncertain, watching Caspar from a distance like someone sizing up a particularly arrogant rug. The falconer mutters something about desert nonsense and retreats to his loft. Wolf just sighs and starts drawing up plans for a new shelter. Caspar, meanwhile, does what camels do best: glowers, eats everything in reach, and sits down with the theatrical weight of someone announcing retirement from life's responsibilities. You try leading him with carrots. He spits. You try apples. He sniffs and sneezes. Eventually, he decides he likes barley mash and will only move for it. You make a note. Despite the theatrics, Caspar becomes oddly popular. Children gather to throw bits of straw at him. Nobles gather to compare his eyelashes to their own. Someone writes a poem about his haughty nostrils. It is recited aloud, twice. And slowly, Caspar settles in. He develops a fondness for the tortoise, often sitting near her for hours without blinking, possibly because she doesn't ask anything of him. A new paddock is built with high beams and windbreaks. The camel lumbers in, surveys the space like an emperor inspecting a new province, and finally, lets out a satisfied grunt. You consider it a win. What surprises you most isn't Caspar's adjustment, but the stories that follow in his wake. With the camel comes a caravan of ideas, tales from the east, whispered legends, embroidered maps showing lands so distant they may as well be drawn on clouds. Merchants talk of elephants that paint with their trunks, birds that mimic human speech, and cats the size of sheep that roam sun-blasted hills. Historians still argue whether these tales were factual, exaggerated, or just desperate attempts to impress dinner guests. Probably all 3. But in your zoo, they ignite imaginations. A scribe paints a tiger he's never seen, giving it zebra stripes and a cheerful grin. A cook asks if camel milk makes better cheese. A monk wonders aloud whether camels have souls, which sparks a week-long theological argument that ends in mutual agreement to ask later.
The court is abuzz with dreams. Inspired by the camel, a noblewoman commissions a tapestry of animals of the world. You watch as her weavers attempt to depict giraffes, hippos, and kangaroos using only second-hand descriptions and creative license. The kangaroo ends up looking like a dragon holding a basket. No one has the heart to correct it. Meanwhile, a new enclosure is built, not for any specific animal, but as a kind of open invitation, a gesture. If any of the creatures from far-off lands happen to arrive, they will have a place, room to breathe, room to puzzle the goat, terrify the monkey, and possibly befriend the tortoise. The idea of the zoo shifts again, from collection to curiosity, from spectacle to symposium. It's no longer just a place to admire animals, it's becoming a living atlas. You find yourself imagining what else might come: a bear with a golden mane, a serpent with feathers, a deer so fast it outruns its own shadow. Wolf laughs when you say this. You're catching the bug, he says. What bug? The dreaming one. And he's not wrong. One morning, you wake to the sound of bells and the scent of cinnamon. A traveler has arrived, cloaked, sun-worn, leading a cart draped in canvas. Rumors ripple through the court. Another gift? A merchant's treasure? A secret weapon?
You are summoned. The cart is unveiled. Inside, 2 peahens, quiet, shimmering, eyes like glass beads, movement smooth as poured ink. They are not as flashy as the peacock, but somehow more elegant, less concerned with being adored. The traveler bows and says only, "They asked for home." Later, you find Casper standing near the peahens, watching them as if unsure whether to approve. They ignore him entirely. The bishop's man suggests naming them Faith and Grace. The queen suggests naming them Breakfast and Lunch, mostly to see his expression. Ultimately, they are named Mist and Mirror. They seem not to care. You record all this in the logbook, which now spans 3 volumes. Your handwriting has evolved from blocky and tired to swooping and precise. You've started adding doodles, tiny sketches of feathers, camel ears, leopard yawns. There's talk of turning the zoo into a formal institution, giving it a name, a banner, a motto. You suggest, please don't feed the camel unless you want to be spat on. It doesn't make the shortlist, but it gets a laugh. That night, as snow begins again, just soft flurries this time, you sit outside Casper's paddock, bundled in furs, a cup of warm cider in your hands. He sits like a fortress, unmoving, steam rising from his breath. You think about where he came from, the journey, the hands that led him, the tongues that shouted, coaxed, praised, scolded. You think about the people here reshaping their world because of one stubborn animal. And you think, this is what it means to grow. Not just in numbers or size, but in imagination, in curiosity, in possibility. Casper snorts. You offer him the last of your barley mash. He takes it, gently. And then, in a moment so brief you nearly miss it, he leans slightly toward you. Not much, just a shift of weight. But enough. Enough to feel like a beginning.
Somewhere between the camel's indignant snorts and the peacock's relentless flirting, it begins to dawn on you. This place no longer belongs to the king alone. You're feeding the parrot when it hits you. Not literally, though the parrot does lob a grape at your head, possibly out of boredom or principle, but emotionally, philosophically even. The zoo has changed, not just in size or species, but in ownership. Not legal ownership, of course. The king still technically owns everything, including your boots, your bunk, and possibly your eyebrows if the treasury runs short. But emotionally, spiritually, the animals belong to everyone now. There's the stable boy who hums lullabies to the lynx when she has a stomachache, the old gardener who insists the tortoise understands Latin, the cook who sets aside scraps for the fox, roasted carrots never raw because he has standards, the queen's niece who brings a new ribbon for the goat every week and claims he winks when she ties it. And then there's the quiet girl from the scullery. No one remembers her name, but everyone knows her hands. Gentle, always slightly damp from scrubbing, always full of crumbs for the birds. The hawk lets her touch his wing, once. It's more intimate than a handshake. You watch these interactions with growing warmth and occasional exasperation. A goat in the kitchen, again? But mostly you marvel. Historians still argue whether medieval zoos were for power or education, spectacle or science. Here, it's something else. A shared heartbeat, a living poem, a place where the line between watcher and watched dissolves like sugar in tea. The animals have personalities now, not assigned, discovered. The fox is a trickster, obviously. He once stole a scroll and returned it tied in a bow. The leopard, majestic and aloof, has a favorite patch of sun and growls if anyone else lies in it. The tortoise, who's become something of a saint, draws pilgrims who sit in silence and attempt to match her stillness. The falcon has moods, good ones, bad ones, melodramatic ones.
Once, she refused to fly for 3 days because someone polished her perch too aggressively. Another time, she flew straight into the bishop's wig and refused to return until someone recited a prayer backwards. Coincidence? Perhaps, but you'd swear she smirked. Caspar the camel, increasingly confident in his role as the one true ruler, has taken to inspecting new visitors. He walks up, sniffs, decides. If he grunts, you're in. If he snorts, try again later. If he spits, leave the grounds immediately and reevaluate your life choices. But it's not just animals that are transforming, it's the people. The falconer who once grumbled about feather dust now composes lullabies for each bird. Wolf, who used to scoff at sentiment, secretly knits little booties for the monkey in winter. Even the bishop's man, stern, squinty, now blesses the water troughs as if they were baptismal fonts. And you've stopped counting the hours.
Where once you rose to the sound of bells, now you wake with the rustle of feathers. Your steps follow a path of habit and instinct. Feed this one first, check the hooves, fluff the straw, sweep the courtyard, whisper to the owl who hates loud noises. You no longer write in the logbook out of duty. You do it from memory, for wonder. You write down not just what the animals do, but who they are. Tuesday. The lynx rolled on her back, exposing belly, allowed precisely one stroke before attempting to remove my thumb. Success rate, 60%. Friday. The monkey pretended to be asleep, then opened one eye to watch me clean. Threw a leaf. Closed eye again. Repeat behavior suggests complex inner world or severe boredom. Sunday. Tortoise sneezed. Everyone panicked. She's fine. Somewhere along the way, someone paints a sign. Not a royal decree, not a Latin inscription, just a wooden plank nailed to a gate. The Garden of Living Curiosities. It's crooked, misspelled. A bird poops on it within an hour, but people smile when they read it. One of the knights suggests building benches, not for show, not for ceremony, just so visitors can sit, watch, listen. The creak of the monkey's swing, the crunch of the leopard's pacing, the steady, saintly silence of the tortoise. A noblewoman donates cushions. A baker starts selling sweet rolls near the aviary. A scribe begins sketching visitors' portraits with their favorite animals. There's laughter, a shared hush, the occasional scream, usually monkey-related. It becomes a ritual. Children come on feast days. Old men come on quiet mornings. Travelers bring stories and sometimes animals. A hedgehog from the north, a singing bird from the coast, a frog that allegedly glows in the moonlight. It doesn't, but it is very loud. Wolf proposes a new logbook format. He says, more diagrams, less ink stains. You ignore him and keep drawing your crooked foxes. And then one day, a stranger arrives. He wears robes of indigo and amber, his beard braided with beads. He says little, smiles often. He brings no animal, but he brings news. In my country, we build gardens for animals, not for the king, for everyone. You stare, then laugh. We've done that too. He walks the ground slowly, pauses by the falcon, the camel, the lynx. Then he kneels by the tortoise who stares at him like she knows every secret. When he leaves, he gives you a scroll, no name, no seal, just a map of a garden, open, circular, with paths that spiral out from a central fountain shaped like a lion. You pin it to the wall. Later, Wolf walks by, stares. Is this real? You say, maybe, or maybe it will be. And that's the shift. Not just in how people see the zoo, but in how they imagine it. As something more. Something that grows not by command, but by care. Not by decree, but by dream. The animals don't know any of this, of course. The goat is still chewing boots. The owl is still offended by lamps. The monkey is still plotting revolution. But the people know. And in every ribbon tied gently to a fox's tail,
every whispered blessing over a peacock's egg, every sketch tucked into a child's sleeve to show their grandmother back home. The truth ripples out. This place is not a royal project. It is a shared story. And you are the keeper of its pages.
The zoo sounds different at night. Not quieter, never that, but different. Softer in some places, stranger in others. You step outside just after sundown, the sky still holding on to a sliver of gold, and already the nocturnal orchestra has begun warming up. First, the flutter of wings, the owl, of course. She's already awake, clicking her beak with disapproval as she rotates her head toward you like a suspicious librarian. She does this every night, and you always nod in greeting. You suspect she keeps score. Then comes the low, rhythmic growl of the leopard, stretched out in her den, pacing in tight figure eights. She doesn't sleep at night. She prowls. Occasionally she huffs loudly, as if to remind the rest of the zoo who is in charge after dark. And honestly, they seem to believe her. Farther down the path, the tortoise shuffles, ever so slightly. You wouldn't know it unless you were paying attention. Just a whisper of movement through straw, a soft bump of shell against stone. She always heads for the same corner of the enclosure at dusk, where the moonlight spills through a crack in the wall. You once asked her why, and she blinked slowly, which, to be fair, is her response to everything. The camel snorts in his sleep. You jump. Casper, even in slumber, manages to sound mildly insulted. He lies like a collapsed tent, limbs akimbo, eyelids twitching. Occasionally he grinds his teeth, probably dreaming of being back in the desert, with fewer goats and more dignity. The sounds lair, chirps from the hedgerows, the clack of the monkey throwing pebbles at his water bowl, because he prefers his reflection on the left, the eerie hoot of something that is either a nightjar or a ghost. Historians still argue whether the medieval zoo kept owls intentionally or simply tolerated them as night watchmen with wings. You walk the ground slowly, your lantern casting flickers on the stones. Every sound has a place, every creature a rhythm. There's something deeply hypnotic about it all. Not peaceful, exactly, but present. The kind of presence that sneaks into your spine and settles there, warm and a little wild. You find yourself matching your steps to the cadence of the zoo. 1, 2, pause, creak, shuffle, snort, whisper. You start noticing things. The fox always circles his pen 3 times before lying down. The parrots mutter in their sleep, dreams of fruit, probably. The goat snores, loudly, like a blacksmith hammering underwater. One of the peahens hums. You didn't know birds could hum, but this one does. Soft, tuneless, but comforting. You've stopped questioning it. The air itself feels different at night. Cooler, yes, but heavier too, thick with stories. Like the animals have spent the day absorbing sunlight, gossip, and breadcrumbs, and now they're exhaling it all into the twilight. Sometimes you sit near the aviary and just listen. Not to the birds necessarily, but to the space around them, the silence between the notes, the hush that follows the falcon's wing beats, the moment when the leopard pauses her pacing and all the crickets go quiet at once. It's a symphony of stillness, interrupted only by the occasional clatter when the monkey remembers he owns a stick. Wolf joins you sometimes, sits beside you without speaking, both of you bundled in cloaks, legs stretched out, sharing a flask of something vaguely fruity and almost definitely fermented. You don't talk much, but occasionally he'll murmur something like, "Did you hear that?" Or, "The owl's late tonight." And you'll nod. Because you did. And she is. One night, a storm rolls in. Not a dramatic one, Just steady rain, like someone wringing out a cloud. You grab your hood, make your rounds. Most of the animals tuck in tighter, tails curled, wings folded, eyes gleaming in the dark. The tortoise doesn't move. You think she likes the rain. Casper, however, sulks. He doesn't like anything, but rain is high on his list of offenses. He lumbers to the edge of his shelter, glares upward, then back at you, as if to say, "Fix this." You apologize, offer him a carrot. He accepts it, but grudgingly. Later, you find the monkey huddled under his awning, holding a soggy piece of cloth like it's a prized heirloom. You bring him a blanket. He ignores it. Typical. As the rain softens, the sounds shift again. Drips on stone. Squelch of soaked straw. The quiet rustle of feathers being rearranged. The world seems narrower at night. Not smaller, just closer. Like the zoo has wrapped itself around you and is breathing with you. You wonder if the animals feel it too, if their dreams sync up, if the owl dreams of flying with the fox on her back, if the leopard dreams of jungle leaves instead of pine needles, if the tortoise dreams at all. You once asked the bishop if animals had souls. He blinked twice and said, "Only the ones that look you in the eye." You think about that a lot, because they do look you in the eye. The owl, with her steady spinning stare, the lynx, with her wild patience, the goat, with his alarming intensity. They watch you watching them, and somewhere in that exchange, something unspoken passes. Recognition, maybe, or mutual curiosity, or the silent agreement that yes, you are both weird creatures doing your best to navigate this absurd little kingdom. Some evenings, a bard visits. He sits near the gate, plucks a few notes on a lute, and hums songs with no words. The animals don't seem to mind. In fact, the fox comes closer. The peahens fluff their feathers. Even the falcon tilts her head like she's listening. The bard never asks for coin, just a place to sit and the company of beasts. You like him. One time, he tells a story about a lion who sang lullabies to the moon. You don't believe it, but the owl seems intrigued. And as the moon arcs higher, the zoo leans into its lullaby phase. The leopard finally lies down. The owl still watches. The monkey's stick falls from his hand. The peahens murmur in their sleep. You walk one more loop. Lantern lower now. Step softer. The world has shrunk to this garden, this heartbeat, this slow breath shared between fur and feather, scale and straw. You check each enclosure. You whisper a good night. You don't know if they hear you, but you think they do. You close the gate. You set the lantern down. You sit on the bench, still damp from the rain. And for a moment, you let the zoo hold you. No duties, no feedings, no scrolls to write. Just you and the night and the sound of a camel chewing somewhere in the dark. Morning returns not with a trumpet or a rooster, though the monkey does attempt both, but with the quiet creak of wooden gates and the shuffle of sleepy boots on stone. You stretch before the sun's fully risen, blinking through a haze of damp straw and half-forgotten dreams. The tortoise is already awake, of course. You're not sure she ever truly sleeps. She seems eternal, like a stone that occasionally blinks. The rest of the zoo is in that strange in-between state, neither asleep nor fully alert. A few birds mutter, the lynx yawns dramatically, the goat is staring at the horizon like he's expecting the apocalypse. He might be right. Today is feeding day. Well, every day is feeding day, but this morning it's special. Not for you,
but for them. You've been preparing it all week. Sacks of oats, baskets of fruits, hunks of meat, all lined up in the little courtyard like a medieval buffet, if medieval buffets included 3 kinds of hay and an entire raw rabbit. Feeding time has become something of a ritual, not just necessity, but ceremony. You don't just give food, you present it. The leopard's meal, for instance, must be placed on a raised stone slab, angled just so, while you look away. She insists on privacy while she devours things. Dignity matters, apparently. The monkeys get their fruit diced, not because they care, but because if you don't, they throw it at each other, and then at you. Once, you forgot to peel an orange. You still have the scar on your boot. Casper, the camel, demands a parade. You've stopped trying to understand him. He stands dramatically at the edge of his pen, gazing out as if expecting applause. When you toss him carrots, he catches them mid-air with unsettling accuracy and chews loudly. It's his way of saying he approves. The goat eats everything. His oats, his straw, your notes, part of a tunic. He once tried to consume a scroll titled On the Proper Care of Hooved Creatures, which you found either ironic or prophetic. But it's not just about what the animals eat, it's how they eat. There's a rhythm to it, a pace. The falcon waits for her meat to be placed on a specific perch. The fox sniffs everything 3 times before nibbling. The tortoise, well, she takes her time. You've watched her chew a strawberry for 15 minutes. It's almost meditative. Over time, you've started treating the process like theater. And why not? The visitors gather quietly near the fences. Children whisper predictions. The lynx goes first today. No, the monkey will steal the bananas. As if betting on a very polite animal race. You lean into the spectacle. You wear your cleanest tunic. You rehearse your steps. You whistle a jaunty little tune as you distribute apples and fish heads with equal flair. One day, someone claps. You're not sure whether to bow. Historians still argue whether medieval feeding practices were based on observation, superstition, or complete guesswork. You suspect it was all 3. You've seen Wolfe insist the falcon performs better if he wears red. You've seen the bishop's man bless a bowl of goat gruel. And once, someone scattered dried lavender near the lynx's den for aura alignment. It didn't work. She just sneezed. The truth is, the ritual matters. It creates order. It tells the animals, here is your moment. You are seen. You are fed. You are loved in a slightly chaotic carrot-throwing kind of way. And they respond in kind.
The lynx purrs, quietly but unmistakably, when she's pleased. The monkey has started offering you pebbles in exchange for grapes. Bartering, medieval style. The fox has taken to following you for several paces, then veering off dramatically, as if choosing not to steal your pouch. Again. Even the owl, cold and unreadable, has begun blinking at you a little slower. You think it's a compliment. There are mishaps, of course. Last week, the goat got into the melon bin and then refused to come out, insisting on being treated as a guest of honor. He headbutted anyone who disagreed. The camel once ate half a decorative flag. His spit turned bright purple for a day. You tried not to look directly at it. The monkeys keep trying to feed you. They're generous, if misguided. But mostly, it flows. Each animal knows the routine. Each moment feeds not just the body, but the rhythm of the place. And gradually, others begin to participate. Children arrive early to help carry baskets. A baker donates stale pastries for the raccoons. Yes, you have raccoons now. Long story. The queen's niece brings jars of honey for the bear.
You don't have a bear. She insists it's for the bear to come. You leave the honey out anyway. And then there are the artists. They arrive with sketchbooks and charcoal, trailing curiosity and whispered awe. They crouch beside the tortoise, lie belly down near the fox, perch on fences trying to capture the way the parrot tilts his head, or how the goat's tongue somehow reaches everything. You like watching them work. The stillness of their hands, the way they pause mid-sketch to smile at a yawn or a sneeze. One of them draws you handing a fig to the lynx. The drawing is terrible, but you keep it. Feeding time becomes story time. Someone starts writing down the day's meals like a menu. Leopard, 2 quails and an attitude. Goat, everything. Owl, 1 mouse, served with regret. Someone else carves little signs for the enclosures. Please do not feed the camel. He has opinions. Or, monkey does not need more sugar. Trust us. A noblewoman writes a poem about the way the falcon eats with 1 claw raised, as if toasting the wind. You think it's pretentious. The falcon probably agrees. You post the feeding schedule on a board near the entrance. It's immediately ignored. The animals, after all, follow their own time. You once tried bells. They scattered the peacocks. Then came drums. The leopard bit a cushion. Now, you simply use your voice. A call, a rhythm, a whistle known only to the zoo. And they come, one by one, in their own way. The lynx slinks, the goat gallops, the fox trots like he's late for dinner, but too elegant to admit it. And as you stand in the middle of it all, apple in one hand, dried fish in the other, you realize you've become something rare, a conductor of a quiet, delicious symphony, a steward of fur and fang, scale and squawk, not a master, not a servant, something in between, something gentle, something human. The bread runs out, the melon is devoured, the parrot is back to throwing grapes. You wipe your hands on your tunic and smile. Feeding time is over, but the story continues. You don't remember when the noble families first started showing up in silk. At first, it was just a duke's cousin, flamboyant, bored, and, allegedly, very interested in the medicinal properties of mongoose teeth. He arrived with a parasol the size of a cathedral window and a dog that barked at everything except the animals. Now, it's a full event. You've barely poured the monkeys their morning water when you spot the procession winding its way up the hill. 12 men in boots that have never touched mud, 6 women in dresses wide enough to catch wind like sails, and a man leading a tiny pony for no discernible reason. You squint. He's the herald. Another pageantry day. The medieval zoo, once a practical curiosity wedged between a monastery's herb garden and the castle's back stables, has somehow become a place for public performance. It's not just about the animals anymore. It's about being seen, seeing them. You straighten your tunic. You've stopped fighting the spectacle. Lean into it. That's your new motto. Besides, someone has to keep the monkey from stealing a duchess's wig again. The visitors gather beneath the painted awning, swatting flies and pretending not to be startled every time the lynx yawns. The fox is particularly smug today. He does a little showy leap over a log and then grooms himself in full view, clearly aware he's being admired. The goat headbutts the fence in protest, not at the nobles, just in general. He's a creature of principle. Then come the questions. They always ask the same things. Is that leopard truly dangerous? You nod solemnly. Does the owl talk? Only when she's in the mood, you say. Why does the camel look like it's judging me? He is, you explain. They laugh, uncomfortable. The camel does not. You walk them through the zoo like a court jester turned animal guide, delivering facts laced with enough folklore to keep things mysterious. Mainstream historical fact.
The concept of menageries in Europe took root in royal courts as early as the 8th century, when Charlemagne received an elephant from the Abbasid Caliphate. That elephant, incidentally, was named Abul Abbas and likely had more titles than the average baron. You tell the story with flair, of course, adding a dramatic pause and a whisper. Historians still argue whether the poor beast ever actually saw snow. The nobles nod gravely. Someone claps. And then comes the part you dread. Requests. Can the lynx do a trick? Will the falcon fly in a circle? Does the tortoise respond to poetry? You handle them as best you can. The lynx doesn't do tricks. She makes you feel like you're the trick. The falcon might fly in a circle if she's feeling charitable and the sky smells correct. The tortoise ignores most stimuli, including time itself. You've developed polite ways of saying no. Alas, she is temperamental today. Ah, he performed yesterday and is now on his spiritual rest. Let us not anger the gods of reptilian slowness. It works. Somehow, it always works. Still, you watch the animals carefully. Spectacle has its dangers. Not everyone who enters the zoo comes for knowledge or respect. Some want ownership, domination, proof that they're better than a fox, cleverer than a monkey, more poised than a parrot. The animals notice. You see it in the way the lynx retreats deeper into her den on louder days. The owl fluffs her feathers and faces the wall. Even the monkey, usually eager for chaos, seems subdued around a certain type of guest.
So you set boundaries. The ropes stay up. The food is never hand-fed. The animals are never touched. This is not a court playground. It is a kingdom of its own, and you are its guardian. The bishop backs you up, partially because he's afraid of the goat. The steward supports you too, especially after the camel spat on his cousin. Still, you find yourself navigating diplomacy more than you'd like. The queen's niece wants a painting of the peacock. The artist insists the peacock should stand just so. The peacock, naturally, chooses that exact moment to fall asleep with its head under its wing. You suggest they paint the goat instead. No one finds this amusing, except the goat. Later that afternoon, a troubadour plays a lute near the fox's enclosure. You notice, for the first time, that the fox sways slightly when the chords are soft and low. You file that away. Might be nothing, might be something. That evening, a baron leaves behind a scroll, a fanciful map of his own imagined zoo, complete with griffins, hydras, and a bear with 3 heads. You chuckle as you roll it up. He's half mad but enthusiastic. You place it on the shelf alongside other scrolls, gifts, speculations, ideas. The zoo has become more than a home for animals. It is now an idea, a place where reality and myth walk side by side, where learning wears a jester's cap and facts slip by wrapped in fairy tales. You host lessons for squires now, bring them to see the owl's flight, explain how falconry shaped not just hunting, but the very language of nobility. To be hoodwinked, you explain, comes from the falcon's hood. The squires blink. One writes it down. The monkey pelts them with apple cores. Education, you muse, is never a straight path. You lead scholars through the reptile pens and argue the differences between crocodile and dragon with increasing flair. Fringe tidbit, in some medieval bestiaries, crocodiles were said to cry while devouring prey. Hence, crocodile tears. The owl, listening from above, seems unimpressed by this origin. There's even a friar who visits weekly just to observe the tortoise. He claims it is a creature touched by the divine. You ask them why. He says, because she doesn't care what day it is. You begin to keep records. Not just feeding and behavior logs, but anecdotes, stories, reactions. A collection of small, strange moments. You call it the observations of the living beasts, which sounds official enough for posterity. One entry reads, Monkey stole shoe, returned it with flour inside. Another, Caspar refuses to acknowledge duck, possible feud. Another still, Lynx stared at a painting for 20 minutes. Painter cried, "Don't ask." Each scroll feels like a footprint in fresh snow, proof that something passed here, left a mark, and changed things just a little. At night, after the nobles have gone and the sky returns to stars, you sit by the fence and breathe. You've stopped measuring success by visitor counts or royal compliments. You measure it in quieter ways. A fox trusting enough to doze near the gate. A goat no longer eating your ink. A camel who lets you scratch behind his ears without biting. You once thought the zoo would be a spectacle. Now, it's a sanctuary. And every visitor, noble or otherwise, walks away different, just a little. They blink more slowly. They whisper more often. They step lighter. And somewhere deep in their silk-lined thoughts, a tiny voice wonders, what if that goat was judging me? You wake one morning to find a scroll tied to the tortoise. No explanation, no name, just a rolled parchment strapped gently, not tightly, you check, to the edge of her shell with a strip of blue ribbon. The tortoise seems unfazed as usual, plodding along with all the urgency of a drifting cloud. You squat beside her, unroll the scroll, and begin to read. It's a poem, a strange one. Addressed to the curator of creatures, it sings praises to the slow-footed dragons, the storm-eyed cat, and the shaggy spitter of spiteful wisdom. You assume the latter is Caspar the camel. The poem ends with a curious line, "May the collection grow, but never tame." You reread that last phrase, let it settle. It stays with you all day. Because, oddly enough, the collection has been growing. It started subtly, a rescued badger here and abandoned owl there. But lately, people have been arriving at the zoo not as visitors, but as donors. They bring animals, creatures they can't care for, beasts they've heard tales about, even a few they found in what they claim were divine dreams or mysterious forests. The bishop's steward brings a porcupine, claims it was discovered under the cathedral pews. It looks mildly annoyed and refuses to eat anything that isn't peeled. You give it the monk's apple and make a mental note. Porcupines are picky. A merchant offers a snake in a box. You lift the lid cautiously and find not one, but 3 snakes curled like elegant punctuation marks. He says they do tricks. They don't. One morning, a traveling juggler drops off a squirrel in a tiny red hat. Name's Pip. He's smarter than me. You believe him. You build more enclosures. Small at first, wooden pens and thatched roofs, but soon the space expands. A few craftsmen offer help. They donate timber, rope, even glass for viewing panels. So the noble ladies don't faint when the fox blinks, one jokes. A stonemason builds a tiny amphitheater near the monkey tree. For school children, he says, but you find him there often, sketching the tortoise, sipping tea. The growth is organic. No one commands it. It simply happens. One day, the zoo is 10 enclosures. The next, it's 20. You find yourself assigning names to places that didn't exist last month. The aviary loop, the wattle path, the quiet grove. You name a small alcove the whispering corner, because it's where the owl prefers to sleep, and everyone instinctively lowers their voice there. You create a map, hand-drawn, overly detailed, full of squiggles and notes. Beware of goat. Parrot lies. Fox may follow. This is not a threat. Visitors adore it. Someone offers to illuminate a copy. It comes back with golden vines and a tiny painted tortoise tucked in the corner. You hang it near the entrance. It starts to feel less like a zoo and more like a living manuscript, a page constantly being added to, edited by paw prints and feathers and little teeth that chew the margins.
Still, not everything is smooth. As more animals arrive, so do the debates. One scholar insists you separate the owls by dialect. Another claims the lynx is misclassified and should be renamed a storm panther. A squire argues that the fox is, in fact, a spirit guide and refuses to enter unless blindfolded. You politely decline the idea. And then there's the space problem. The walls can't expand forever. The forest brushes close now. The old moat has become a barrier. The field beyond is owned by a noble who once tried to wrestle a goose and lost. Negotiations are delicate. You hold a meeting. Yes, an actual meeting around a large table built from scavenged fence posts and set beneath a canvas awning. You invite the bishop, the steward, 2 artists, a healer, and a very confused goat who refuses to leave. They argue for hours. More fences, fewer monkeys, better signage, more scrolls, less noise, a second tortoise. You veto that last one, not because you dislike tortoises, but because you suspect the current one would not approve of roommates. Historians still argue whether the medieval zoo was more spectacle or sanctuary. You think it can be both. You say so. They blink at you. Then they nod. The artist offers to draw pamphlets, gentle guides for visitors on how to behave around animals. The steward agrees to negotiate land rights with the goose wrestling noble. The bishop proposes naming the camel an honorary monk. You don't comment. After the meeting, you walk the grounds. It's quiet now. The sun is low. A fox trots by with a feather in its mouth. The parrot mutters something unrepeatable. The lynx watches from her perch, calm and queen-like. You pause at the tortoise's pen. She's asleep, probably dreaming of strawberries, or outliving everyone. You think about that poem again. May the collection grow, but never tame. The phrase stirs something. Because the zoo has grown, yes, but it hasn't lost its wildness. There's still a flicker of untamed rhythm beneath every routine. The animals haven't become performers, they've become participants. And you, your human companion, are not their master. You are their translator, their steward, their sometimes feeder, sometimes apologizer, always listener. You make a new sign, hang it at the front gate. It reads, "Welcome to the Living Zoo. Please do not expect perfection. We are all figuring it out." Visitors love it. So do the animals. You catch the monkey reading it one morning. You're not sure if he understands the words, but he nods once, solemnly, then steals your breakfast bun. The camel tries to eat the sign. You move it higher. That night, a child leaves a drawing on the fence, a picture of the zoo drawn with wobbly lines and too many colors. Every animal is smiling. You too. You tuck it into your journal. You don't know what tomorrow brings. A new animal, a new visitor, a new debate about tortoise theology. Maybe all of the above. But you know this. The zoo is becoming something more. Not just a place to see animals, a place to remember gentleness, to relearn patience, to laugh quietly when the goat escapes again, and to whisper, even without meaning to, "Hello, Wonder. I've missed you."
There's a fine mist hanging in the air as you open the gates. Dawn has barely lifted her sleepy head above the trees, and already the owl has retreated to her perch, fluffing her feathers like she's clocking out of a night shift. The monkey is curled up in a hammock he most definitely wasn't issued, and the goat, predictably, is standing in the wrong enclosure, looking pleased with himself. You yawn, stretch, and begin your rounds. Lately, your days start earlier. Not by choice exactly, but because the zoo has become unpredictable. In a delightful way, mostly, but occasionally in a why is the tortoise halfway up the watchtower stairs kind of way? Still, you've grown fond of the morning quiet. This is when the animals are most themselves, before the curious hum of visitors rises, before the poets and students and monks arrive. You've learned to listen, really listen to the rhythms of the place. The scrape of claw on stone, the swish of a tail through dewy grass, the heavy, syrupy silence that settles over the lynx enclosure like a royal cloak. You've become a connoisseur of animal moods. The camel, for instance, is in what you call his regal disdain mode. He stands near the fence, head high, eyes half-lidded, radiating judgment. He's been doing that more often since the bishop blessed him. You suspect it went to his head. The fox is in his philosopher phase, lying belly up in the sun, eyes closed, as though contemplating the origins of fire or the taste of cloud shadows. And the monkey? He's in early mischief. You catch him trying to train the parrot to mimic snoring sounds. It's almost working. You pause at the lynx's den. She's out, tail twitching slowly, pacing in wide arcs. Her eyes flick to you, just once. Then she settles. She trusts you. You never take that for granted. Trust, you've learned, is the quiet currency of this place. It's earned in small moments, when you return a stolen boot without scolding, when you sit beside the tortoise for an hour doing absolutely nothing, when you let the goat escape just long enough to feel triumphant before gently herding him back. You didn't plan to become this kind of person, a zookeeper of moods, a translator of snorts and hisses and tail flicks. But here you are. And now, others are starting to notice. There's a friar who arrives every few days, journal in hand, determined to write the moral teachings of beasts. His chapters so far include On Humility, Lessons from the Tortoise, and On Gluttony, a warning from the monkey. You find them oddly moving. A noblewoman has taken to painting the animals, not grand portraits, but little studies. Just a lynx's eye, a parrot's wing, the goat's improbable grin. She leaves them for you, unsigned, tucked into corners like secrets. Even the children are changing. Where once they shouted and ran and tried to feed everything bits of bread, they now walk slower, ask quieter questions. One boy asked you last week, "Does the fox dream of running?" You had to sit down for that one. Mainstream fact: medieval zoos, known more commonly as menageries, were typically reserved for kings and emperors, hidden behind castle walls as private symbols of power and worldliness. Few ever saw them, fewer understood them. But here, at your little patch of kingdom, the gates are open.
Not to everyone, of course. There are rules. No shouting, no teasing, no attempts to ride the camel, again. But the principle stands. This is not a fortress of spectacle. It is a garden of observation, a library of lives that don't speak Latin or French, but something older, wilder. You stop at the edge of the new enclosure, the pond. It was a gift, technically. A traveling merchant whose cart got stuck near your entrance swore he had no coin but promised a water beast instead. You assumed he meant a frog. You were wrong. He returned days later with a large wooden tub, sloshing with weeds and bubbles. Inside, a creature best described as a bundle of whiskers and stubbornness. A beaver. You'd never met one. You named him Bernard. He's taken to reorganizing the pond daily, dragging branches from parts unknown, constructing elaborate dams that immediately collapse. Then he begins again, completely unfazed. Fringe tidbit. Some medieval bestiaries believed beavers would bite off their own testicles to escape hunters, which, setting aside the logistics, is a dramatic testament to commitment. You've assured Bernard there are no such expectations here. He blinked at you, unimpressed. Bernard has become something of a mascot. Visitors adore him. Children cheer when he wobbles out with a new stick. Artists sketch him mid-muddle. The tortoise remains nonplussed. Historians still argue whether animals in medieval collections were seen as individuals or merely symbols. You think the answer lies somewhere in the middle. The lynx, for instance, was long associated with sharp sight and vigilance. Some even claimed it could see through walls. But here, she is just herself. She naps in patches of sun, she snarls if anyone tries to rhyme near her, she plays with a rock she's had since winter. You stop mid-path. Something rustles near the aviary. You squint. Out steps a creature you did not expect. A peahen. Not a peacock, no bright blues or emeralds, just quiet grays and soft earth tones. She looks around, unbothered, then begins pecking at the ground like she owns the place. You have no idea where she came from. No one delivered her, no one announced her. She simply arrived. You name her Minerva. She ignores you. That afternoon, a student from the distant monastery asks if he can write a play about the zoo. He calls it The Parliament of Beasts. You agree, provided the camel gets a monologue. He returns a week later with 10 pages of Casper soliloquizing about the burdens of wisdom and the softness of figs. You approve. Evening falls gently. You sit near the pond. Bernard slaps the water with his tail. The fox curls beside you, breathing soft. The parrot mumbles lullabies it heard from visitors. The tortoise snores. Yes, she snores. A soft rasping sound like parchment being turned in the wind. The wind shifts. You think about all the small accidental magics that led here. A broken cart, a stolen shoe, a poem on a shell, a goat with a flair for drama. None of this was planned, and yet it feels inevitable now. Like the zoo always wanted to exist. It just needed someone to listen long enough to hear it waking. So, you do what you've always done. You listen. To the frog plopping into the pond, to the monkey humming something suspiciously like a drinking song, to the silence between the sounds, the vast, velvety hush that cradles the night like a lullaby sung by a world that's finally, gently exhaling. You close your eyes for a moment, then open them again just in time to see Minerva hop onto the tortoise's back. She doesn't mind. Neither do you.
You know something's changed the moment you hear the rooster. Not a distant farm rooster, mind you. Not even the monk's accidental poultry who once escaped into the monkey enclosure and caused chaos with a banana. No, this rooster sounds close, commanding, possibly sentient. You blink sleep from your eyes and shuffle outside, and there he is, standing atop the goat's favorite barrel like he's just won the Crusades, is a rooster of considerable attitude and an even more considerable comb. His feathers shimmer somewhere between rust and gold, and his eyes glint like a knight recently denied his lance. The goat stands beside him, oddly subdued. You suspect they've reached some kind of uneasy alliance. You approach slowly. "Morning," you say. The rooster crows again. You offer a bit of barley. He ignores it, clearly above handouts. So you sigh, fetch a bowl, and pour a more refined mix. Oats, cracked corn, a touch of rosemary from the cook's garden. The rooster regards it, then eats it like royalty, reluctantly accepting tribute. And just like that, he stays. Visitors love him. Children name him Sir Beak-a-Lot. The bishop tries to rename him Benedict II. The parrot just calls him Oi. You let it be. Because somehow, despite the absurdity, Sir Beak-a-Lot brings a sense of order. He patrols the walkways, keeps the squirrels in line, warns you when Bernard the beaver begins dragging visitors' shoes into his dam. You find that oddly helpful. Still, you can't help but marvel. The zoo has gone from curiosity to community to something else, something harder to name. It's not just animals and enclosures anymore. It's a whole world with its own rhythm, rituals, and paperwork. Yes, paperwork. Because now people want positions. A young woman offers to be your official beast interpreter, claiming she speaks fluent fox. Another insists he's destined to be keeper of the goat. You create titles just to keep up. One boy, no older than 10, presents you with a scroll and a wax seal. "I'm the historian of whiskers," he declares. "I document mouse activity." You hire him on the spot. Mainstream fact? Medieval zoos, particularly those kept by royalty, sometimes had official positions like Master of the King's Beasts. These weren't just caretakers, but managers of status and spectacle. Animals were not merely fed, they were presented. You wonder if your beasts would consent to be presented. The fox, maybe. The camel, definitely not. The lynx would bite someone. But the tortoise, well, she's already a legend. You find a new poem tied to her shell one afternoon. This one shorter. Shell of stone, soul of moss, time's companion, never lost. You don't know who's writing these, but you leave them posted on the visitor board. People start quoting them. One monk turns them into songs. A painter illustrates them in tiny illuminated pages and hangs them like prayer flags around the zoo. Someone paints the camel with a halo. He seems to approve. There's a strange peace in all this. The world beyond the zoo still tumbles forward, full of noise and mess and occasionally someone shouting about bread prices. But here, inside the walls, things move slower, like they're being chewed over thoughtfully by the tortoise herself before being gently passed on.
Fringe tidbit? In the 13th century, Frederick II of Sicily had a private menagerie with a giraffe, a cheetah, and even an elephant. The giraffe reportedly caused confusion among courtiers who mistook it for a divine omen. You think about that as you watch a child try to explain a raccoon to his grandmother. She remains skeptical. Historians still argue whether the public ever truly understood these exotic animals, or whether they were just fodder for spectacle, more myth than mammal. You see glimpses of that tension sometimes. One visitor insists the parrot speaks prophecy. Another swears the lynx blinked in Morse code. But most just come to watch, to wonder, to sit in silence as Bernard builds another doomed dam or the goat chews someone's cloak. That, you think, is enough. One afternoon, you spot something odd. A scroll, nailed gently, yes, nailed, to the post near the camel enclosure. You ease it free, unroll it carefully. It's a plan, a schematic, really, not of buildings or walls, but of pathways, arrows, flowcharts, circles labeled lynx paws and reflective zone. It's signed only with a paw print. You check for ink-stained animals. Nothing suspicious. Still, the map intrigues you. You follow it. It leads you through the back path, past the aviary, through the orchard, where, yes, the parrot does claim an apple every day, and finally to a hollow in the hedge. Inside, a single stone bench, perfectly placed, facing west, catching the last rays of sunset. You sit. It's quiet. Then the tortoise arrives. She moves slowly, as always, but with purpose. She stops beside the bench, looks up at you, then keeps walking. You sit for a long time. Later, you find another note. Bench of Becoming. No explanation. You smile. That night, you host your first lantern evening. Visitors arrive at dusk, each given a small candle in a glass jar. You guide them quietly through the paths,
past enclosures, around corners where shadows stretched like curious whispers. No talking aloud, just walking, watching, listening. The lynx glows like silver fire. The owl stirs and stares, solemn as scripture. The monkey sleeps for once, curled like punctuation at the end of a long, silly sentence. The effect is magical. Afterwards, people linger, sit by the pond, watch Bernard float. Some hum, some cry. A girl kneels by the fox and simply whispers, "Thank you." No one knows for. It doesn't matter, because here, in this not-so-medieval, very much real zoo, gratitude needs no reason. It arrives like the wind, like poetry on parchment, like a rooster who appoints himself guardian of goats and dignity. So you sit beside the bench again. You breathe in hay, earth, feathers, fur, and you realize something. This zoo, the one that wasn't supposed to exist, wasn't supposed to grow, wasn't supposed to mean anything beyond look at the odd animals, has become a kind of mirror. Not of power, not of politics, but of wonder, of what it means to pause, to care, to notice the difference between a turtle and a tortoise and understand that both matter. You lean back. The stars blink on. Somewhere, the parrot mutters, "Oi!" And the night, full of slow rustles and sleepy snorts, folds around you like a cloak that's been waiting your whole life to fit just right.
The moon is full again. You know this not because you looked up, but because the animals are acting strange in ways only a full moon can explain. The lynx is restless. The monkey is unusually silent. The parrot has adopted a baritone voice and is quoting ancient poetry. The goat is attempting interpretive dance. You, of course, expected this. Full moons in the zoo have become a kind of seasonal festival, though no one calls it that out loud. It starts subtly. Visitors begin arriving later in the day. Artists bring candles instead of charcoal. Monks carry empty scrolls and hopeful expressions. One nobleman brings a lute and a truly unfortunate singing voice. You let them all in. You do not make a speech. You do not light a ceremonial torch. You simply nod and open the gate, and they drift in like tide water, gently pulled by something older than schedules and louder than announcements. Tonight, something feels different. It's not just the brightness of the moon or the odd hush that has settled over the usually chatty enclosure corners. It's anticipation. The Beaver's Dam is looking particularly architectural. Pillars and arches and what appears to be a small shrine built from discarded ladles. Sir Beak-a-Lot has cleared a circular patch of dirt and now stands in the center of it like a tiny sun god, preening dramatically. Even the tortoise has positioned herself at the highest point of her enclosure, her shell catching the moonlight like a polished shield. You walk the path slowly, noting details. The camel is facing east, eyes closed. The fox is nowhere to be seen, but you find paw prints near the pond. The owl is out early, scanning the world with practiced indifference. And then you spot the friar. He's standing near the lynx enclosure, murmuring something, one hand held out like he's offering a blessing or a very small sandwich. You step closer. "It's begun," he whispers. You don't ask what it is. Instead, you wait. And that's when the sounds start. Not animal sounds, not exactly. Not the usual chatter, rustle, huff, screech that defines your day-to-day auditory landscape. No, this is different.
It's more like music, but not from any instrument you know. The parrot is harmonizing. The fox appears on the path, tail sweeping side to side in a steady rhythm. The goat, still mid-dance, now coordinates with a kind of tempo, each stomp surprisingly metrical. The camel opens one eye and lets out a perfectly timed grunt. It's not a concert, not a performance, and definitely not a hallucination, although you briefly wonder about that mushroom stew you had last week. It's a ritual. A ritual you didn't invent, one that simply appeared. Mainstream fact: many medieval cultures attributed supernatural qualities to animals. Owls were symbols of wisdom, but also omens. Cats were both protectors and accused of witchcraft. And wolves walked the line between holy symbols and devilish threats. No wonder people assumed they danced in moonlight.
You settle onto a bench and let the night unfold. One by one, the animals find their place. The lynx paces slowly, drawing wide circles like a celestial compass. The parrot alternates between Gregorian chant and pirate songs. Bernard, the beaver, sits in front of his dam like a scholar waiting for debate. Then the children arrive. They come quietly, ushered by parents who seem equally entranced. No running, no shouting, just wide eyes and small hands gripping lanterns. One by one, they sit cross-legged in the open grass, forming an imperfect circle. You've seen a lot in this zoo. Accidental poetry, surprise ducklings, mysterious paintings. But this feels like something else. Not planned, not expected, but inevitable. Fringe tidbit? There was a medieval legend of a monastery where animals gathered every full moon to receive secret teachings from a talking deer. No one ever found the monastery, of course. Some claimed it was hidden in dreams, others in the forest. A few monks swore it was real and that they'd been turned away for being too noisy. Tonight feels like that legend stepped gently into your backyard. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed in these kinds of stories or if they told them just to hold on to a sense of wonder. You think it doesn't matter. Belief isn't always the point. Sometimes the act of watching with care is enough. One of the children begins to hum, a soft, tuneless sound. Then another joins in, and another. Soon the circle of children is humming together, not in harmony, but in shared frequency. The kind of low murmur that lulls bees and comforts tortoises. The tortoise approves. She slowly ambles down from her perch and joins the circle. No one flinches. A girl gently pats her shell. You watch her eyes widen in awe. Then from somewhere behind the trees, a new sound. A drum. No musician in sight. Just the sound of a single, steady drum beat. Low, firm, patient. You glance at the friar. He shrugs, looking more delighted than alarmed. The moon climbs higher. The fox walks between the children like a silver thread stitching them together. The camel sighs deeply as if releasing the dust of centuries. And you? You sit very still, overwhelmed by the quiet certainty that something very old is visiting tonight. Not a ghost, not a god, but perhaps an idea. That animals are not here for us, but with us. That the zoo is not a place of captivity, but of convergence. That if you wait long enough, sit still enough, and listen with more than just ears, the whole world starts to speak in symbols instead of sentences. You lean your back against the tree. Your knees ache, your fingers are cold, and your heart feels oddly weightless. You close your eyes for just a moment. When you open them again, the animals are gone. Not gone, just back to their enclosures, sleeping, quiet. The children are yawning, parents lifting them into arms. The friar is writing furiously in a notebook. Sir Beak-Salant is back on his barrel, clearly pretending none of this ever happened. You stretch, step forward, feel the damp grass under your feet, and realize the drum beat is still going, but softer now, like it's receding, or maybe just going back to wherever mysterious animal moon music originates. You smile. A goat headbutts your knee. It's fine.
Morning arrives slowly, the way it always does after a full moon. You don't so much wake up as you are gently peeled away from whatever soft corner of consciousness you retreated to. The birds are already chattering, and Sir Beaksalot is loudly asserting his sovereignty over the courtyard like an avian herald of breakfast. You sit up on your bench beneath the oak tree, blink at the soft golden mist rising from the dew-soaked grass, and stretch, the kind of stretch that makes your spine sound like a medieval drawbridge. There's something different in the air today. Not dramatic, not mystical, just different. A touch clearer, like something resolved itself last night, even if no one spoke the words. The animals move with quiet purpose. The camel has taken to pacing his enclosure like a philosopher mid-thought. The fox is curled beneath a log with her tail tucked neatly under her nose, eyes fluttering in sleep. The owl is gone, presumably back to whatever corner of the bell tower it uses as a retirement villa. You walk the path, as you always do, but this time your steps feel ceremonial. Not heavy, not rushed, just mindful. First stop, the tortoise. She is, as always, precisely where she needs to be, mid-path, angled like a sundial no one else can read. You bow slightly. She does not bow back. She's busy. Existing. You move on. The beaver dam has expanded again. Bernard has now incorporated 3 spoons, a small boot, and, worryingly, a bishop's hat. You make a mental note to return that. The goat has obtained a crown. You pause. It's made from willow branches, tied neatly with twine and garnished with dried marigolds. It suits him. He bleats once, as if acknowledging your approval, then returns to his important work of eating a rope he's not supposed to eat. Mainstream fact: in the late medieval period, animals were often anthropomorphized in art and storytelling. Goats were sometimes depicted as philosophers or tricksters in illuminated manuscripts. It's oddly satisfying to know this goat would have thrived as a medieval celebrity. You enter the aviary. The parrots are quieter today, more contemplative. The green one mutters something about taxes. The blue one simply hums. You think they're processing the full moon event, same as everyone else. You sit on a bench inside the enclosure and breathe. The wind moves through the mesh like a sigh. A feather drifts down and lands on your shoulder. You don't brush it off. Instead, you look around this place you've helped shape, not just with wood and stones, but with care, attention, patience, and jokes. So many odd little jokes woven into every corner. The punny signs, the inexplicable statue of a mouse on a throne, and the bucket labeled "Do not feed the bucket."
Fringe tidbit: in some medieval towns, jesters and fools were employed not only at court, but also in public spaces to keep spirits light and remind everyone, rich or poor, that laughter was its own kind of medicine. You've unknowingly followed that tradition here, making the zoo not just a menagerie, but a stage for whimsy. Historians still argue whether medieval people believed animals had souls. Some monks claim they did. Others insisted only humans had that spark. But no one could quite explain why animals seemed to know when to comfort you, or when to disappear, or when to show up precisely when the stew was ready. You rise again. It's time to check the visitor board. The scrolls are thicker today. Layers of parchment pinned one atop another like a fan of curiosity. Drawings, poems, questions. A child's sketch of the tortoise with a crown. A note in careful calligraphy. The fox walked beside me. I did not speak. It was enough. You add your own message.
A simple line in charcoal. Still here. You wander toward the garden. It's grown wild, beautifully so. Herbs tumble over the edges of raised beds. Flowers bloom in strange, delightful combinations. Bees buzz without urgency, like they're sipping their way through a very long afternoon. The friar is there, planting something. You approach. "Marshmallow," he says, without looking up. "For the lynx's cough." You blink. "I didn't know the lynx had a cough." He smiles. She doesn't. Yet. You nod, like that makes complete sense. It does, somehow. You offer to help, and he hands you a spade. Together you plant things whose names you barely remember, but whose scents you will never forget. Wormwood, valerian, feverfew, old friends and green clothes. Eventually, you part ways. The sun has climbed higher now. Visitors will arrive soon. Children with breadcrumbs, nobles with walking sticks, monks with portable harps. The usual. But for a moment, you linger beside the outer wall. There's a ladder there. Old, rickety, mostly ignored, but something draws you up today. You climb slowly. At the top, you stand and see everything. The enclosures arranged like a puzzle no one's quite solved. The pathways winding like gentle thoughts. The tortoise moving as though time had personally invited her to dimmer. The goat, crown intact, locked in a diplomatic staring contest with a duck. This zoo, this accidental kingdom of oddities and wonders, stretches before you like a living manuscript. You take it in, all of it, and then you descend. You return to the gate just as the first visitors appear. You open it, let them in. Some pause to nod at you, others rush toward the raccoons. One stops and asks, "Is the fox awake?" You shrug. She might be. It's enough, because in this place, answers are less important than questions, and wonder is the true currency. And you, tired and proud and still a little confused by the goat's newfound charisma, stand at the center of it all. Still here, still listening, still building a medieval zoo, one sleepy, magical moment at a time.
And now, as the final candle gutters low and the breeze outside your window carries the faintest scent of time and rain-damp stone, you let yourself lean back, deeper now, heavier into the softness beneath you. The animals have all quieted. The goat's crown rests lopsided beside his haystack. The fox curls deeper into her hollow, her breath slow and even. Bernard the beaver has stopped constructing for the night, his dam untouched since sundown, as if even he must sometimes pause. You can almost hear the rustle of feathers, the gentle creak of old wood, and the comforting shuffle of straw. Everything is slower now. The paths, once buzzing with movement, feel like ribbons tucked gently into the folds of a dream. The zoo sleeps. You sleep. Even the moon seems to blink more slowly. It doesn't matter if some of it was real and some of it imagined, whether there really was a ritual beneath the stars, or if the animals whispered secrets in a language you almost understood. What matters is that you were there, that you stayed long enough to listen, long enough to feel the earth exhale beneath your feet. Tonight, you were part of something quiet, something odd and gentle and ancient, a place built not with stone and iron, but with patience, care, and a ridiculous number of buckets. And maybe, just maybe, you'll return. But not yet. Not now. Now the only thing left to do is nothing at all, to let your thoughts drift like mist over a sleeping pond, to feel your breath steady, your limbs soften, your mind hum its own quiet lullaby. You're safe. You're home. You're somewhere where even the lynx dreams gently, and the parrot refuses to squawk. So let go.
Let the zoo fade behind your eyelids. Let the world go soft and sleep.